welcome to Crime in Court. My name is Heather, and this is another episode in the truth behind The Making a Murderer, which was a Netflix hit series, of course, with Wisconsin versus Steven Avery and also Brendan Dassey, his nephew. So this is for the life that was taken of Teresa Halbach. And we've been going through the case files on my channel. We've gone through a lot of stuff already, and we've watched a bunch of interrogations. We've done a lot to get to where we are here. We've done the foundation work. So now we're in the trial, and we've gone through opening statements. We went through witnesses, such as family members of Teresa, co-workers. We who else was it that we... Oh, ex-boyfriend Ryan Hilligus. We heard from him. We heard from Pam Sturm, who was the cousin of Teresa, but she also found the RAV4 with her daughter, who then testified on day 3, which was February 14th of 2007. Her daughter, Pam's daughter, Nicole Sturm, testified also about finding the RAV4 in the Avery yard. And then we left off with the last episode that was with Nicole. We read a little bit of hers, but then we read all of Bobby Dassey's and the motions in between. There was a lot going on in that one. It was kind of fun to listen to all the back and forth about Bobby Dassey's testimony. So if you missed that, I highly recommend it. It was a good one. And he's highly suspect, I would say, with his answers. They just rub me the wrong way, and I don't believe him. So you go back and see for yourself what his answers are, if you didn't already. All right, so next on day 4 was Trooper Timothy Austin, and he testified to a reconstruction. He's a reconstructionist, so he did some mapping of the Avery yard. He went there and he did a bunch of measurements, and they made a bunch of like 3D images and things off of those measurements, which were all used as, visual aids in the trial. So that is what he did, and he talked about his process in collecting that, doing his measurements and things like that. So not really all that relative to anything that we need. All right, so Bobby Dassey is then continued on day 4. We were on day 3, sorry. So day 4 is February 15th, and Bobby Dassey returns for his cross-examination. Remember, Strang did not know, there was new information brought up at trial that the defense team did not know. So he did not want to continue the trial without being able to communicate that further with the witness. So they were able to, as a remedy, split it up, and he went the next day after they were able to do some more investigative work on their end. Okay, so we ended with Bobby Dassey. We read both his day 3 and day 4 testimony. All right, so next would be Lieutenant Brett Bowe. I'm just telling you everybody who did testify, so you kind of, even if we don't read through all of their testimony, at least you get like a feel for who else was at the trial, because, it is helpful to know, like, all these people that they have on the state side, and then you're going to see that the defense has a very, very short defense compared to all of the information that was presented at trial for the state. So we'll get there. So anyways, the next person was this Lieutenant Brett Bowe. He talked about securing the Avery yard when he first gets to the scene. He's one of the people involved in setting up the security of the Avery yard. So they put like people at 4 corners of the yard and made sure that nobody came in and nobody came out. And he talks a little bit about that process. Then we get a Deputy Peter O'Connor with the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, and he was the first law enforcement officer on the scene after they found the RAV4. So He's Manitowoc. Manitowoc County should not have stepped foot on that property, in my opinion. All right, so Sergeant Jason Orth was also first lead investigator, not lead investigator, law enforcement, to make contact with Pam Sturm. So he is the first one to talk to Pam, and he talked to her about, he testifies on how he, gets to the scene and talks to her, and what she tells him about how they found it. So then that brings us to day 5. So we're flying through these. We're on, well, maybe not flying, but I want to give you as much information as I can without having to totally bore you. So anyways, the next person on day 5 is the first witness on day 5 is Julie Kramer. She talks about her dog and where the dog sniffer, she's the dog handler for the dog that is supposed to be able to sniff out human remains, corpses, deceased body parts, things like that. This dog is supposed to be able to be good at finding, although I don't put a whole lot of stock in it because it's, how can we scientifically prove anything? I mean, it's just, I love dogs. I love my dogs. But I'm not going to put some man's life in prison, take his whole life away, basically, set him up in prison for the rest of his life on a dog handler telling me the dog marked here. I'm not going to do that. It's not scientific enough for me. You can't prove anything. All right, so Special Agent Thomas Fassbender is next. We are going to actually read through all of his because he is the co-lead investigator in this case. You might remember his name. He was one of the people who was interviewing or really harshly interrogating Brendan Dassey, him and investigator Mark Wiegert, who is also lead investigator in this case. So we're going to hear from him too in a little while. But first, let's get started with Special Agent Fassbender. His testimony. Please hit the like button before we get started. Hit that like, make sure you're subscribed, and all those good things. All right, so I just clicked on I just threw up a picture here of Fassbender right under me. And so now you have a visual too of what he looks like. All right, so we are on trial day 5, and we're going to skip right to Special Agent Thomas Fassbender's direct examination by Ken Kratz, none other. All right, so Mr. Fassbender, how are you employed? I'm a special agent with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation. How long have you been a law enforcement official? Almost 27 years. What is the Department of Justice? The Wisconsin Department of Justice, run under the auspices of the Attorney General in Wisconsin. There's a law enforcement branch to that division, question. There's a law enforcement branch to that division or department, is that right? Yes, that's the Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI. Division of Criminal Investigation. Do you have a specific area of authority with DCI? Yes, I'm currently with Special Assignments Bureau within DCI. DCI is broken up into several different areas and bureaus, and that is where I am. And the primary purpose of Special Agent Bureau, amongst other things, could be homicide investigations or death investigations. And why does DCI typically assist, or why are they assigned homicide investigations? Due to the complexity of those types of investigations at times, and with the size of them, and lots of times you have counties that maybe have 1 detective or 2 detectives, and DCI is there to assist in those instances. Is it common for DCI to take over an entire case, or does DCI typically help other agencies? DCI typically assists. I'm going to direct your attention, Agent Fassbender, to November 5th of 2005. Ask if the Division of Criminal Investigation received a call on the day to assist in an investigation. Yes, we did. Could you describe for the jury how that happened? A sheriff from Calumet County, Sheriff Pagel, contacted DCI, I believe the administrator for DCI, and asked for our assistance at that time, which was still a missing persons investigation being conducted. Did you personally respond? Yes, I did. And where did you go and what time did you get there? I received a call at home. I probably departed that area or my residence about 1. I picked up another special agent and headed to the Avery salvage yard and the Avery properties and probably got there just a little after 2 p.m. that day. Sometime at or about 2 p.m., were you involved in, that is, did you participate in discussions regarding who was going to lead up or be in charge of this investigation? Yes. And could you recount those discussions for the jury? Upon arrival at that scene, I met with, I know for sure, Jerry Pagel, the sheriff of Calumet County, and I was advised that the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department had asked the Calumet County Sheriff's Department to take the lead role in the investigation. And let me advise that the investigation pertained to Teresa Halbach. And the reason that we were at the Avery salvage yard was that her vehicle had been found on that property. Did you, on behalf of the Department of Justice, agree to assist and participate in this investigation? Yes. As the investigation unfolded, could you identify for the jury other law enforcement agencies that were involved in this investigation? Of course, Calumet County Sheriff's Department, DCI, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, Manitowoc Police Department, Two Rivers Police Department. Some smaller police departments in Calumet County, New Holston, I think Brillion, I think Kiel. Winnebago County Sheriff's Department was with a dive team. Brown County Sheriff's Department assisted in a capacity. I'm not real sure what capacity that was at this moment. FBI has assisted with technical assistance. Marionette Sheriff's Department. Holy crap, that's a lot of people. That's just the law enforcement agencies? Yes. So how can you not say, with that many law enforcement officers wandering around on this property, how can you say that it wasn't, like, tainted? Any evidence that you collected? Like, there's just so many people. Is that even necessary? I don't think so. Were there, well, I guess, you know, when you're starting out as a search, but still, I don't know. That's a lot of counties that got involved. Were there other support agencies that assisted? Yes. Name some of those if you can recall. Various fire departments, volunteer fire departments from both Calumet County and Manitowoc County. Great Lakes Search and Rescue would be an example of who we just heard from. So the dog handler. Wrecker services, implement dealerships, citizen search groups, pilots. I imagine I could go on a little while yet, but I can't think of them. I guess my question, Agent Fassbender, is in the over 25 years of experience that you have had, especially in homicide investigations, have you been involved in any investigation with this many agencies and this many resources being assigned to one case? No, sir, I have not. See what I'm saying? Like, you have way too many people to say that you could know for sure that nothing you collected on that property was planted, tainted, something. There's so many agencies involved. Anyways, no, sir, I have not. You mentioned the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department role as lead investigator or as one of the two individuals assigning responsibility to allocate all of those resources that we're talking about. Could you describe what Manitowoc's role was contemplated to be. Yes, it was decided that they would assist in the investigation in a support capacity or an assistance capacity. It was their county. They knew the resources. They had the contacts for such things as wrecker services, implement dealerships if we needed equipment, and various other things that would have come up. Many other things that probably came up during this investigation on scene. Were you able, and have you been able, to attach a number, that is, how many different individuals, both the law enforcement and support services, that were involved in this investigation from start until today? A total number? Are you able to do that or not? I can get close day by day, but I have never attached a total number, no. The allocation of resources, the assignment, the decision to assign specific officers to specific duties, how are those decisions made? Basically, it was a group decision as teamwork, and we had 2 lead investigators on the scene, so-called myself and investigator Mark Wiegert from the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. The sheriff was out there. We had other detectives and investigators out there, and what commonly would happen is, like when I got there initially on Saturday, there was a briefing. And I was briefed as to what was happening and what had happened. We would get together and make decisions on where we want to go and what we want to do. After activities are completed, for example, like the end of the day, we would have a debriefing session where we would meet and we would talk to the investigators, searchers, interviewers, neighborhood canvassers, and try and get a report back on the information that they have come across or evidence that they may have found. And we digest that, and as a group or as a team, we try and decide what we want to do next, where we want to go with this. The resources that were available to you, again, whether it's law enforcement, for now, let's limit it to law enforcement resources. Did officers that were presented to you, and law enforcement assets that were presented to you, have different levels or degrees of experience in various law enforcement areas? Certainly, yes. And was that factored into your decision on who to assign to the task? Most definitely. Can you give some examples? Obvious example is if we were going to search for evidence, the location of evidence, which may involve the collection and processing of evidence, I want someone that's trained and experienced in that area to do those searches. In this instance, we had the crime lab there on and off the scene. We utilized them to go to some various areas or spots where evidence was found because obviously their people are trained in that area. Are you familiar as a law enforcement officer and homicide detective, are you familiar with evidence technicians or law enforcement officers that have that specialized training also? Certainly, with most departments, counties, police departments, they have individual officers on their department that have received additional and specialized training in the collection, processing, preservation, etc. of evidence. And those are the types of people that we're going to want to do the task. What kind of case did this start out as? Missing persons case. And in those very early stages of this investigation, what was your primary goal in the missing persons investigation? Do you understand my question? I imagine the primary goal in a missing persons investigation would be to find the missing person. I mean, duh. Congrats. What was your goal in this case? Yes. Yes. Oh, was that your goal? Sorry, was that your goal in this case? I thought it said, what was your goal? Okay, I'm dumb, not them. All right, so what was the goal in this case? Was that your goal in this case? Yes. All right, so now at some time And we're going to hear about the first 11 days or so. In fact, we're going to hear about 15 months worth of investigation, but for the first day, the first hours of that investigation, was your goal different than it became throughout the rest of the week? In fact, for the last 15 months, yes. How was it different? In the fact that we were searching for and hoping to find Teresa Halbach alive. Agent Fassbender, decisions that you made in this case, were those decisions in this case different when this was a missing persons or searching for Teresa alive, and did that change sometime over time? That's a really awkward way of asking that, but are there different decisions that are made when you are looking for a live body rather than being involved in a criminal ongoing investigation? It depends on when you're talking and when I got there, or as opposed to Thursday when she was first reported missing. There's differences. When I got there, even though we were still in a missing persons capacity, I'm talking on a little different light to this, and I'm coming in thinking that something bad had happened. And we do that because we don't want to miss anything. We may get one chance at this, and it's easier to prove or disprove that maybe something bad happened than to go... Sorry, my dog is really distracting me. We may get one chance at this, and it's easier to prove or disprove that maybe something bad happened than to go the other way and not have the evidence or the scene to work with it. So it makes sense, kind of, the way he's describing it. Question. I understand. Let's talk kind of globally or big picture about a search plan. First of all, were you one of two law enforcement officials that were directing search efforts in this case? Yes. Did you have an overall plan or an overall search plan for not just the first day, but the first week of this investigation? Generally, I think you can have an outline or an overall search plan to start with, but depending on evidence found or information from interviews brought back or neighborhood canvases, stuff like that, it needs to remain fluid. You can't have that lock and load mentality and say, this is what we're going to do. It may change. What? Lock and load mentality. Let's talk specifically then about your search plan, the first day or even the first hours. What was your first search plan or your first plan of attack? Just after search warrants were obtained, I think it was Judge Fox in this case. Well, number one, in any investigation, a homicide or death investigation, I should say, is life is first and foremost, always. Check for life, find life, and treat it, even at the cost of maybe losing evidence. So in this case, it was no different. We need to see if Teresa is on the property and if she's alive. So we organize a sweep. Law enforcement officers, we call it a sweep. But basically what they are doing is sweeping through the buildings on the property to see if Teresa is in any of the buildings. Along with that is also a concern for officer or other people's safety. That's a secondary concern on a sweep. Is there anyone else on the property that could be of concern for law enforcement safety? So the sweeps are organized with the law enforcement officers we had present. Question. Is that the first thing that law enforcement does, is sweep through these, talking about the residences now? Most always, yes, that's the first thing we do. And what kind of distinction is a sweep versus a search of a property? Well, this property was a little different. On a normal death scene, you are sweeping there to check for life and for safety. And maybe you have to bring EMTs in and other people, a coroner. You can't bring them in to the scene unless you know that scene is secure and safe. The same thing here, essentially, to make sure that to the best of our ability, a scene that size and its size to be what did I say? Same thing here. Essentially, to make sure, to the best of our ability, a scene at that size, that it's safe, and to determine why or if check to see if we could find Teresa. Was that done in this case? Yes. Were all of the residences on the Avery property swept? Yes. Were all of the businesses, were all of the business buildings and other outbuildings swept? Yes, sir. After that sweep was performed, and we get into this after the break, but my last question, at least for this part of the examination, is did your search efforts then become more directed or more detailed? I'm going to add to my answer here. We had the sweeps, and we had, as we heard already, the dogs were brought in, and the dog was utilized specifically in certain areas. The car crusher, which they never found anything on the car crusher. Why even bring it up? You had the dog go there multiple times, and there was nothing. So he didn't use the car crusher on her. Nobody did. In the line of cars along the south berm, some of the residences and the buildings. Not just one dog, I believe 9 dogs were brought in. And then they were also utilized to sweep that property, the vehicles, the salvage yard property, 4,000 plus vehicles. They were working, and they were accompanied with law enforcement officers at that time. And then, yes, then we started talking about where are we going to go from here? Are we going to get more detailed, or what are we going to do? Attorney Kratz says, with that then, Judge, I think this is a good time for the morning break. The court says, all right. The court agrees. Members of the jury, at this time, we'll take our break. Now, the jury is not present. Before breaking, the record should reflect that the parties requested 2 brief sidebars this morning. The first one was a defense inquiry as to whether or not the state had a copy of Julie Kramer's report. That's the dog handler's report. The second, more brief sidebar was Mr. Kratz asking the court if we should hold a break or begin Mr. Fassbender's testimony, and we did. Does that reflect counsel's understanding of what transpired? Attorney String says it does. And just so it's clear, we have the defense has a copy of the report. It just didn't happen to put it in the file. So it's not that it hadn't been turned over. It was. Sorry, my dog is needing me for a second. Come on, dog. Nobody wants to see my armpit and whatever up close on the screen. Okay. Sorry. She always has to, I tell you guys all the time, but she twists and twists and twists to find her spot, and I have to hold the blanket up so the blanket doesn't twist around with her, and she's very picky. She likes her blanket. Anyways, all right, so the court says, all right, we'll resume with Mr. Fassbender's testimony in 15 minutes. The jury is now present. Okay, Mr. Kratz, you may resume your questioning of the witness. Kratz says, thank you. Direct examination continued. Agent Fassbender, you had previously told us about a search plan or methodology that first includes a sweep securing the area looking for a live body, and that was, in fact, performed in this case. Is that correct? That's correct. Is your search methodology, after that is completed, that is, after that sweep is completed, what's the next level of searching that you had performed on the 5th? At that point, we're probably back at the command center, taking in information and briefing each other. I know we still had dogs searching the salvage yard perimeters of buildings at that time. The Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory from Madison, Wisconsin, had been called earlier on and had arrived at the scene somewhere around 4 in the afternoon, probably. And they were, although they went to some different areas on the property there, their primary purpose was to process and take care of the RAV4, and that was found, the RAV4 that was found on the scene. That was Teresa's. While that was going on, a decision was made to start the search of the buildings, residences, and a evidence location collection processing team was put together to start the process with the individuals we had or the personnel that we had on the site. We were able to come up with one team of 4 individuals to start that process. And they started at Avery's trailer down to the end of the driveway to the west, and they started that about 7:30. Before we get into individual searches, Agent, I'm wondering if we can talk at least in more general terms as to your search plan or your search methodology, that not necessarily where specific places were searched, but if there was, in fact, a generalized search plan. Well, certainly, and in death investigations, normal scenes, generally, like I said before, we determine if there's life and if there's a deceased or a corpse on the scene. Okay. After that, you secure the scene and limit generally the number of people that go into the scene, secure evidence, look for evidence, possible witnesses at the scene that you may want to speak to or detain immediately so you don't lose them, and get a search warrant. You know, there were so many people on that property searching that property. Any one of the searchers could have planted something on the property and been like, oh, hey, look, I found a license plate. Looky here. I found Teresa's license plate. I found whatever. Any single one of them. Including the Manitowoc Police. All right. And in this case, we basically did those things, maybe a little different. We got the search warrant. And again, generally, in a lot of these scenes, you don't necessarily know exactly what you're doing, maybe on the first search. The scene is definitely that way. We don't even have a body, so to speak, so we're not real sure exactly what we're looking for. It behooves us to send investigators into these searches because they are familiar with these types of investigations a lot of times, and they may have a better knowledge about things that might be evidentiary in value. I think about an investigation if I did not take too long ago. I think about an investigation I did not too long ago where we did the same thing. And the death investigation, there was a corpse on the scene and we got a search warrant. We went in and out. We went in and did a search of the building. It was a trailer very similar to the ones that we're dealing with on the scene and the deceased. Attorney Buting says, Your Honor, I'm going to object. If we're going to be talking about a different case, I think we need to focus on this case rather than start describing what searches do or don't occur in other cases. Mr. Kratz, Judge, certainly the methodology, I expect there's going to be questions by defense counsel as to why this took so long if there weren't, because they were, remember, on the property for 8 days with total access to the property, and the Averys were restricted from being there due to the search warrant. If they aren't going to question, then I will stop right now with this line. If there is going to be a cross about that, I think the jury is entitled to know. The court says, because the question relates to why the witness did what he did, I'm going to allow a little latitude and allow him to answer the question. Attorney Kratz says, thank you, Judge. Go ahead. I'm just using this as an example. When you have a piece of evidence, well, the body is a piece of evidence. It gets sent to autopsy. We get a search warrant. We hold the scene. We conduct a search, not necessarily knowing what we are looking for sure. We get intelligence back. And this example, we get information back from the pathologist. And in this case, the pathologist told us to look. It was a bludgeoning death and a stabbing death. To look for this type of knife with this many serrations and a crowbar, a serrated knife and a crowbar that was used. This type of information that they can find out. So that is evidence. He's right. And thus, we ended up holding this scene 3 or 4 days because we're getting information back. Well, I don't think you're supposed to do that. We like to do that because it can assist in our search. It can narrow our scope of search. So a lot of times what I'm getting at is a search may start out fairly broad and maybe not knowing exactly what we're looking for, but it narrows as we move along. Hopefully got more intelligence and information. Is there a term that goes along with this kind of a search methodology? Sorry. You could call it funneling, a funnel approach. Exhibit 86, which is on the board. Do you recognize that scene? Yes, I do. That's the Avery salvage yard along with some residences. Was one of the residences on the salvage yard the residence of Steven Avery? Yes, and he gives the address. Do you know that township that it's located in? Gibson? They both question. Gibson Township. Do you know what county that's in? Manitowoc. And state of Wisconsin? Yes. At the early stage of this proceeding, this is on the 5th of November when you arrived on the scene, and when you were directing the searches, was Mr. Avery, the defendant, Steven Avery, a person of interest in this investigation? When I arrived on scene on Saturday? Yes. And throughout the rest of the 5th? Yes. Why? Because of a lot of things. Information that had been developed. Like what? First and foremost, in an investigation like this, when I go in, who the last person saw, who last saw the person. That's just common sense. Who last saw the person. So that was the primary reason that he would have been the person of interest. All right, you talked about this. So he said a number of reasons, but he just gave one. All right, you talked about the specialization that some law enforcement officers needed. I think you mentioned both evidence detection or collection or processing. After that occurs, is it common for evidence to be sent elsewhere for further examination? Yes. What kinds of pieces is evidence sent for further examination? Any number of pieces. The primary place. Sorry, not pieces, places. My eyesight sucks. It would have been spelled wrong anyway. All right, so the primary place that we would send evidence is to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Wisconsin, either Madison, Milwaukee, or Wausau. The FBI laboratories could be used, private laboratories could be used, specialists like forensic anthropologists could be used. Agent Fassbender, you use the term that I have been asked to have you further explain, and that's a search warrant. Tell the jurors, or those of them that may not know, what is a search warrant? A search warrant is essentially an order signed by a judge directing law enforcement to search essentially a person, a place, or a thing for items of property or items, and then forthwith bring those items back before the court. On a search warrant, you have 5 days to execute the search warrant from the date it is delivered and returned. And after the search warrant is executed, you have 48 hours, normally is looked at as business hours, to return that search warrant to said court with an inventory of items that were seized as evidence. You mentioned that this case, that a search warrant has been obtained. In fact, more than one? Yes. And I neglected to say search warrants based on probable cause by a law enforcement officer to believe that those items of property are where you are looking. And that's through a warrant affidavit or testimony or even a telephone or radio. So usually it's the affidavit of the officer that's collecting the evidence, or, the lead officer. So they find out, whatever, they find out whatever is giving them probable cause, and that's when they go to the judge and get a search warrant. And you mentioned in this case that a search warrant was obtained. Yes. All right, so as one of the lead investigators, I think you said that you were involved in directing search efforts on this property. Is that right? Yes. Were there areas that you were directing searches? Yes. Other than search efforts, this, I mean, globally, the investigation, did it include things other than searching the Avery property? Yes. We had not only the Avery property and the size that we were dealing with there, and the items that we're dealing with there, we also had up in Marion County where Mr. and Ms. Avery have land in that area, and some of the family was up there and that first weekend that we were dealing with. What does that have to do with anything? Some of our DCI agents went up there, and Marion County detectives were also up there. I guess they did some searching for Teresa at the property in Crivets. We were down in Milwaukee dealing with Auto Trader. We were running around to some salvage yards. And a lot of investigations do that. They can stretch you from one end of the state to the other at times. All right, were interviews being conducted in those various locations? Interviews were being conducted in many locations. Now, this is all happening at the same time as the search efforts, is that right? Yes. Though some of the resources that you had to allocate, in other words, direct? Yes. Steven Avery, the only person being investigated? No. Explain that. We got into an investigation. Like I said, I think I used the term before, you are not going to go lock and load. You are going to listen to all the intelligence and information being brought in. Look at all the evidence. You are there to find the truth, and that's what we go there for, is to find the truth. And the object is to allow the evidence and the facts that are uncovered as you go along to lead you to the most logical suspect. So I don't go in with necessarily one person I think definitely did it. There's definitely reasons and intelligence to point maybe in a direction, and you follow that direction. I think you mentioned before that the last person to see her alive, obvious place to start. Is that right? Well, certainly. We heard yesterday, or perhaps it was the day before, about perimeter or scene security. Can you mention that just briefly or discuss that just briefly? That was one of the officers we didn't go through. When you got there to the scene, when you get to a scene like that, or a death scene, it behooves you to secure the scene right away to allow or not allow, let's say, citizens or even officers that shouldn't be coming into the scene. Like Manitowoc County, but they were obviously there. We put on a desk investigation. We put on a desk investigation school. One of the things we always say is, the sheriff, the chief, is going to want to get into that scene. They always want to. Don't let them in. The less people you have in that scene, most often the better, because you are not affecting evidence that might be in the scene, and you try and protect it. You talk about scenes, and I just want to distinguish this case from a typical, if there can be a typical homicide investigation or a homicide that occurs in somebody's apartment. Can you distinguish this kind of case from that? I don't know if I really have to. It's an outdoor scene with outdoor locations, with buildings and stuff, and you have 15 buildings on that property. You have got 40 acres to search. 40 acres in and of itself is going to be difficult, but add 4,000 plus cars to that. 54 crushed cars, multiple individuals, and people to interview. It is not a normal scene. All right, Agent Fassbender, Lieutenant Bowe talked about a command center. Are you familiar with the command center that was established here? Yes. Can you describe how that was set up? Initially, a Manitowoc County, I think maybe a hazmat unit. It's kind of like a big RV in a sense, with an office in it and capable of setting up phones to the scene. And then after that, Calumet County brought a trailer in their command post to that scene, And then we were operating out of both of those locations. And the location being at the end of the Avery Road, right at the area where the road ends, the pavement ends right at that area. So they just set up shop. They put up trailers so they could stay there and investigate for days on end. Being one of the lead investigators, were you familiar with the efforts, not only the search efforts, but the investigative efforts that occurred during the first 8 days of this case? Yes. Let's start then with the first day on November 5th. We have heard about how you become involved, how a search warrant was obtained, how a sweep occurred. We heard briefly about the dogs that were brought in, but you said that there were 9 canine units. Can you tell the jury where they were deployed or where they were searching? The canine units were a mix. They weren't all so-called cadaver dogs. Some were mixed trained, some were more like bloodhounds. Live search dogs. Oh, so they were searching for live people. Got it. Okay. Initially, just one of those brought in, but then after Brutus, we got done with his initial search, the rest were brought in. And the primary focus was to start with was to search the salvage yard in and around the vehicles in that 40-acre area. Can you show in exhibit number 86 what you are talking about? Do you guys want to see? Let's pull up 86 here. Sorry, I did not download these, so it's going to take me, it's going to take me a second to get to it. What is it? 80 what? 86. 86, 86, 86. Alrighty, come on. Speak slow. Alright, so, well, here it is now. Come on, 86. Come on, 86. Oh, I see it. Okay. Overhead shot is what it's called. Alright, let's download that and I'll throw it on the screen here real big. Did that download? I don't know. Okay, here we go. It's not doing it. Come on. There we go. It's a very large photo. Let me shrink it up for you guys, just because it doesn't even fit the screen. But that's a good aerial photo. I'm going to keep it up for a few minutes while I read just a little bit, and then, you know what, I'm going to zoom in a little. Alright, so while that's on the screen, I'm going to continue reading just for a little bit. You guys can take a look and see what he is talking about. Alright, so can you show in exhibit number 86 what you are talking about? Well, essentially, what I'm talking about is the salvage yard area where 3 dogs had to search. That may have included these cars, may have included the impound area also. Due to weather concerns and darkness, they actually came back to complete that search. They came back in the dark and did it. Let's talk about the weather. Do you remember the weather on the 5th? Oh, yes. Tell the jury about that. Initially, it was predicting, the weather was predicting to be bad, rainstorms moving in. As a result, I was in contact with the crime laboratory, and we decided to try and place a tarp over the RAV4 SUV, not touching it, but to place it over and suspend it, which we did. Interesting. And then it started to sleet, maybe a light rain, but the wind really picked up at this time. So the thing's contaminated. The whole freaking RV, I keep saying RV, the whole freaking RAV4 is contaminated. It was out in the rain, in the sleet. There's no way that it didn't get, or that it was preserved properly in bad weather and windy, crappy weather. And then it started to sleet. Okay. Maybe a light rain, but the wind really picked up, and we ultimately ended up removing the tarp because it was starting to let loose, and it appeared that it was going to affect the debris that was used to conceal the car. And we didn't want to do that. So we just had to live with it. So you just let it out in the rain. Then it stopped raining, but then somewhere, my best guess right now is right now after dark it stormed. It was torrential downpour the rest of the night. We got some rain. It filled up the pond down there by the SUV, which was dry at that time, and it stormed very bad. Were you involved in observing Brutus working that area that Ms. Kramer talked about? Yes, I was. Tell us what you recall. Brutus came down and started near the car crusher in the salvage yard and worked the area first, and then Brutus worked to the southeast corner of the salvage yard in that area, and then along the southernmost edge of the property, or berm there. There's a row of cars along that area that Brutus worked along that area. We were advised by Brutus's handler prior what Brutus would do if he was alerted on a vehicle. And when Brutus approached the RAV4 SUV, it became apparent even to me that Brutus had alerted on the vehicle, even going to the vehicle and going back and sitting in front of Julie and barking. Agent Fassbender, you testified that you got there about 2 in the afternoon. Is that right? About, yes. And we have heard other law enforcement officers testify to this, but I'm going to ask you the same questions. Any time after 2 p.m., did you see any law enforcement officer or citizen enter that RAV4 vehicle? No. Did you see any law enforcement officer disturb or tamper with anything around there that would have been obvious evidentiary value? No. Is that important to you? Yes. Why? Because that's probably right now our main place of evidence in this case. So you mentioned the crime lab was called in. Is that right? Yes. How come? I don't request the crime lab, but if I go to death scenes, I always request the agents I'm working with to bring the crime lab in. They are essentially our evidence technicians. Good to know. In front of you, agent, are some photos. We're going to walk through those for the jury. First is Exhibit 395. Tell us what this is. Then he says, you mean 130? I'm sorry, yes, 130. Let's see if I can find 130. Almost. Alright, now I went too far. Yeah, this thing is annoying. Alright, come on. 120 or 102. Is there a 130? Is there? Okay, good. There is a 130. Hold on. So 130. Is that what he said? 130. Yes. Yes. We got it. Come on. This is so frustrating. I am dragging the thing and I'm putting it into my Streamlabs and it's just not coming up. Okay, here we go, finally. My gosh. I'm sorry about the delay here. So this is, I think the dog handler is in this image. Let's see what Agent Fassbender has to say about it. So Exhibit 130, it's almost dark, looks bluish, and it's a photograph of the condition of the RAV4 SUV when I found it. There's some people near the scene. One of them is myself, one is a deputy with Calumet County, and one of them is, the ones I can see, one of them is the forensic scientist with the crime laboratory. You were in the photo? Yes. And do you recognize that scene? Yes. I'm showing the jury now Exhibit 130. Tell the jury what you're looking at, please. Again, that's the Teresa's RAV4 SUV parked facing in a westerly direction along the southern berm of the salvage yard with the debris trees, pieces of wood, cardboard, plywood, and vehicle hood on or around or leaning against the SUV. And then the individuals there, myself, is in the red jacket. We're law enforcement or crime lab personnel. All right, point to the crime lab people if you can. Right there, the nice way to say it, this person with less hair with a crime lab person, was a crime lab person, and then myself. Do you know what his name is? John Ertl. And then the deputy, and he testifies too. And then the deputy from Calumet County, and I think that's the crime lab personnel also. I'm not sure. When you got there again, we have heard this before, but was there this vehicle being watched or guarded? Yes. To your knowledge, from the arrival since, hold on, no, I think we're done with that now. Whoops. I think we're done with that. All right, to your knowledge, from your arrival, since that's all you can testify to, from 2 p.m. until the crime lab arrived, was it continuously watched by law enforcement officers? I arrived and I went to the command post first, right after 2. I probably got down into the area by the crusher a little later, maybe 2:20, 2:25. From that point on, I could say, yes, it was. Why didn't you or other law enforcement officers on the scene enter that vehicle or process it there? Much safer to really, especially with a vehicle, an outside setting like that, with pending weather, to just secure the vehicle, put it in a closed trailer, let the crime lab do their thing. Oh, sorry, I'm not letting you guys see what I'm reading. Just realized. All right, so take it down to the crime lab and process it there rather than trying to process this out in these conditions. Is that what was done? That's what was done. So they took it to their indoor, like Sally Port or whatever. Did anybody, crime lab members included, enter the vehicle at the scene? Not that I'm aware of, no. But we know that there was some point in time or an interview or something where Pam Sturm and Nicole Sturm were talking about being in the car. But they also, so that's another thing about contaminated evidence. She used her tissue. She used a clean tissue to open all, or to check all of the car doors to see if they would open. So tampering with the evidence, like all of the evidence in this case, in my opinion, is unreliable because it's been tampered with or not preserved properly or whatever. All right, so what was done with the vehicle, if you know? Yes, I was involved in that to a degree. Probably about 7:30ish that evening, with the rain coming down, I was asked to take the wrecker service, Raba's wrecker service, down to the area by the crusher. Another, I guess, wrecker service was also there, Pethan, out of Calumet County. They had an enclosed trailer that could carry vehicles. They were also there, came down to that location. And at that point, the crime lab personnel that were there accompanied the wrecker operator over to the RAV4 location where they hooked up the RAV4 and towed it back to the location by the car crusher where the enclosed trailer was waiting, and they backed it into that enclosed trailer and secured it in the enclosed trailer. He repeats himself a lot. They also took some of the items like the vehicle hood and put that in there. They examined a lot of the remaining items to see if there was any obvious evidentiary value on those items and ended up not taking most of the items. I'm going to show you some of those things. What's Exhibit 131? Let's get through these pictures. All right, so 131 is a photograph of the hood and the windshield area of the RAV4. It depicts the branches, we've seen those, and a cardboard box that had been placed on top of the hood of the vehicle. Now that the jury can see 131, is that debris the way it looked the evening of the 5th of November? Essentially, the wind may have moved some things, or the rain may have moved some things. All right, so what's 132? That's a photograph, again, of the SUV. This photograph is taken toward the passenger front quarter panel or quarter area of the vehicle, again, showing looks like a fence post or two and a piece of cardboard up against the RAV4. Now, see Exhibit 132. Is that the image that you are looking at? Yes. What's 133? 133 is a picture of the RAV4. This would be the driver's side rear quarter panel area. We've gone through all these photos. Well, these are actually the photos that law enforcement took. We went through the photos that Pam Sturm took. They're basically the same. Is that Exhibit 133? Yes. Now these appear to be taken after darkness. Is that right? Yes. And remember, Pam Sturm's pictures, it was a little more light out, whereas the picture that I just showed you here, it was dark. So that's how a lot of their pictures are when they took pictures of the car. All right, so a picture of the RAV4 SUV, similar to two exhibits ago, the passenger side a little more inclusive, showing again the fence post, plywood, and debris. Question. And here is 134, and I understand that this gets a little bit tedious or monotonous, but do some of these angles of the different shots become important in not only the investigation, but in most investigations? Certainly. What's 135? 135 is a picture of the rear portion of the RAV4, again showing some of the debris, fence post, tires, leaning up against the RAV4, and this is it. 136, a picture of the RAV4 coming at the passenger rear corner, so you can see the rear of the RAV4, and then the passenger side. Although you can't see most of it because of the fence post and the vehicle hood leaning up against that portion. Before I leave 136, I'm sorry, if you can refer to the exhibit. Do you see any rear license plates if you look at the screen, Agent Fassbender? No. Where would the license plates be? Where would they be? No, I mean, where should they be on this vehicle? To the left of the spare tire and just below it. Can you point with the laser? Certainly right there. It's obvious from 136 that they are missing. Yes. Here is 137. I think you described that. What's 138? I don't know if I did do 137. I thought I had done 136. 137 is a picture of the passenger side of the RAV4, and again depicting the hood, the plywood, and some material, branch material. So this is 137? Yes. All right. What's 138? It's the passenger side front fender area of the same RAV4, and again you can see some of the debris and articles apparently used to conceal it. Is that 138? Yes. And finally 139. I don't know that I have 139. I'm sorry, it goes to 138. All right. After the RAV4 was loaded onto the enclosed trailer, was the trailer secured to your knowledge? Yes. How is the vehicle, by the way? Were you present for the loading of the vehicle? Yes. And how was it loaded on the vehicle? Was it started up or something? No, the wrecker operator backed it into the trailer. There was a ramp set up on the wrecker. Operator backed it right up into the trailer, and then it was secured. Agent Fassbender, you talked about some residence searches occurring that first night, that is the 5th. Were those occurring while this SUV was being processed? Yes. Do you know, or can you tell the jury what residence searches were going on? The residence at 12932 Avery Road, which was the residence of Steven Avery. Back to Exhibit 86, which I'm sure... That's this overhead shot again, in case you are wondering. So back to 86, which I'm sure we'll use a lot in the lower right-hand corner of the exhibit. Yes, the lower right-hand corner right there, which would be the northeast section of the entire property. Now you talked about a sweep, northwest. I'm sorry, you talked about a sweep of that residence. Is this search that you are now describing something different? Yes. How is it different? This search is a search that was organized more for the location. Sorry, where did I go? More for the location of finding of things of apparent or obvious evidentiary value, things that are in the search warrant or asked for in the search warrant. Again, we're not exactly sure, precisely sure, what we might be looking for at this time either. Was the search team put together to search that residence? Yes. And do you know how individuals were selected for that search team? Yes. Tell us about that. We were looking at individuals who preferably were investigators or detectives and who had training, experience, and expertise in the location of and processing of evidence. Were some of those officers or evidence techs on scene? In other words, were they at the location? Yes. And some of them Calumet County officers? Yes. And were some of them Manitowoc County officers? Yes. We might as well address this right now. Agent Fassbender, did you, as a lead investigator in this case, have hesitancy in assigning any Manitowoc County Sheriff's officer to any tasks at the scene? No, absolutely not. Well, I don't care if you feel comfortable or not. It's not, you shouldn't do it. They shouldn't be there, period. Civil suit. Civil suit. He says, no, absolutely not. Tell the jury why. They were there to assist us. In fact, some of the people that actually worked on those teams I have trained and I have worked with. And the people that we're talking about that would have worked on these scenes were law enforcement officers, were very professional and did a good job. Okay, but they might have planted evidence, so there's that, and that should be on your conscience for letting them be there. You talked about resource allocation, where evidence techs were evidence techs at a premium at this scene. Yes. What does that mean? People who, again, officers who have been trained and have experience in processing, locating, preserving evidence. You know, a lot of departments may have only one of those people, two of those people. We had a huge scene here, and most officers don't have that level of expertise. And at a homicide scene, that is the level of expertise I want processing my evidence. Question. You had mentioned just previously, after the weather turned really nasty, efforts were suspended that evening. The majority of the outside efforts were suspended. That's correct. All right. The search inside of Steven Avery's residence, that continued to about 10 if I remember right. After 10 p.m., what happened? Most people, I shouldn't say most of the people involved in the searches met back at the command center where we debriefed. We talked about what had happened. What we learned that day and what was found for evidence. Anything else happened on the 5th of substance. The RAV4 was transported to the crime lab in Madison, Wisconsin. All right, let's move to the next day then. Sunday the 6th. Do you recall that day? Yes. Could you just, in an outline form, in an outline form, tell the jury what investigative efforts occurred on Sunday the 6th. Dogs came back to the scene, so they had more dogs at the scene. The 9 that they had that didn't find anything weren't enough. There was a lot more to search, but they were concerned that because of the rain, that they wanted to do it again or make sure that they covered every place in this property. So they came back. I believe 8 dogs this time came back to the scene, finished the salvage yard, went around the perimeters of buildings, etc. Also brought in that day were somewhere in the vicinity of 45 to 50 firefighters, and we utilized them to get into the salvage yard and look into locked areas or locked containers. Trunks, hoods, any other places that we need to get open to look to see if there was a person in there, a body. Those teams were formed with law enforcement presence. In other words, there's a law enforcement officer with each team of firefighters that went into the salvage yard. Was it your understanding that all 4,000 of these vehicles were individually searched? That is, the Sunday, or the trunks were searched that Sunday? Yes. So that was the main manpower went to that purpose. Also on Sunday, we had the luxury of forming essentially 2-3 evidence processing teams. We had a similar team that we had the night before. We had an additional team utilizing some Manitowoc Police, Manitowoc City Police, evidence technicians, and investigators. So they're utilizing the Manitowoc City Police. And we were able to get the crime lab to come back that afternoon also for additional testing. Also during this time, just like Saturday, there were numerous interviews and follow-ups going on at the time. Were there any firearms or guns seized that day? Yes, the previous evening, the search of Steven Avery's residence, during the debriefing at the end of the evening, the technicians that were in his trailer informed us that they had seen some guns in there, informed us that they had taken what they had seen. They didn't seize the guns. Oh, they informed us of what they had taken and what they had seen. Sorry. All right, so they informed that there was a vacuum cleaner. They took the bag out of the vacuum. They informed us of a carpet cleaner and some other things. It was determined at that time we're going to go back in there and get some of those items, the guns, the 2 rifles. We wanted the vacuum cleaner because of the rotating brush, the carpet cleaner, some bedding. There is no evidence of Teresa on any of these things. So they collect all these things and she was never in that trailer. Yes, there was, and we did re-enter the trailer to get those items. Okay. I think Officer Bowe yesterday talked about dive teams or teams searching ponds. Did that occur that day? Yes, we had the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department dive team on that day also. Are you familiar with the residence of Mr. Avery's sister Barb Jonda? Yes, I am. I'm going to have you look at Exhibit 86 again. Tell the jury where is that property. That property is right here, which would be almost directly east of the Avery property. And then next to that residence is her unattached garage. Question. On that Saturday, that is on the 6th, was any property recovered or seized from outside of near Ms. Jonda's property? Yes. What was that? That was so what day is this now? Sunday the 6th. Okay. There were some 4 burn barrels, and that were located behind her residence. And where can you show us? I think right there, which would be from her residence in a southeasterly direction. Again, I don't know, 100 feet maybe. All right, let me just stop you right there. This is just the first full day, but the second day of search, did you have an idea as the lead investigator yet that what you were looking for. Not entirely. If I might, go ahead. Judge, objection to the witness narrating on his own. Court says, I guess it depends if what he's about to say is in additional response to the last question or simply random thought. I suspect this isn't random, is it? Witness says, no. Buting says, the proper way would be to place a question to the witness. Mr. Kratz, can you elaborate on your last answer, investigator? I believe you asked me about knowing what we were looking for and elaborating on that answer. We had reasons sometimes to go where we went. The barrels, for example, the dogs had alerted on the barrels, so we knew that we wanted to go there. All right. Now, were all of these items, that is, the items that were seized and the places that were searched, included in this judicial authorization, this thing that you called a search warrant? Yes. You called the crime lab, remained on the scene, or came back to the scene on Sunday, is that right? They came back to the scene Sunday afternoon. Were they given some specific responsibilities or specific places to search? Yes, they were essentially kind of like a roving evidence team. Places where the dogs may have hit on or where searchers found what they thought might be evidence. A lot of times that's where we would send them. Okay, this is boring. All right, all right. Were there other residences and buildings searched that day? Yes. Can you tell us about that? We had a search team search the garage, the unattached garage next to Steven Avery's house. We had a team that went through Barb Jonda's house and her garage. We had a team go through the unoccupied or abandoned trailer along the driveway going towards Ms. Jonda and Steven's house. A team went through Mr. and Mrs. Avery's residence and garage. Alan and Dolores? Yes. A team went through Charles Avery's residence and garage. And teams also went through all of the outbuildings in the northeast section of the property associated with the business. So all of their buildings where their business is operated. All of that happening at the same time that law enforcement and firefighters are opening every trunk. Yes. So can you even imagine how many people were on the scene? Is there anything happening on Sunday off-site? In other words, off of this property included your investigation? Yes. Up in Marionette, we were interviewing members of the family up there. I believe it was Sunday that 2 vehicles were seized up there, a flatbed truck from the business, and Steven Avery's car were seized and taken to the police department or the sheriff's department up there. We had agents and detectives doing interviews, neighborhood canvasses. Neighborhood canvasses are essentially someone going around to residences in the neighborhood, businesses, whatever might be, and asking questions about whether they saw or heard anything. So all this is happening at the same time. Yes. It's your responsibility to kind of coordinate all of this at once. Myself and Investigator Wiegert. So the jury is clear. Did you receive assistance and direction not only from other law enforcement, but other legal authority at the time? Yes. Who else was involved? Well, we were working with the district attorney's office, Calumet County District Attorney's Office. Me? Yes. Okay. Well, that's never good. I mean, you don't want to see that they're in cahoots. Shows bias and prejudice. Okay, the search warrants, that is, the request and the authorization by judges, when you received them, is that something that you prepared or something that somebody else prepared? That's something that somebody else prepared. Who typically would prepare them? Either the district attorney, assistant district attorney, or their staff. All right, Agent Fassbender, then, did anything else, at least that sticks out in your mind, occur on that Sunday the 6th? That night before the crime lab retired for the evening, we asked them to go back into the residence of Steven Avery. The reason we did this, we had found what appeared to be blood in there the previous evening. Come on, he cut himself shaving. like tiny little droplets of blood, which don't equate to cutting the throat of a young 25-year-old woman. And they went in there to look at the blood patterns. As a result of doing that, they identified some small blood that needed to be processed, and they advised, as of that, during the debriefing that evening. That was a Sunday. Is that right? Sunday, yes. Is anything else going on at the state crime lab as far as you know on that Sunday? Yes. What was that? The RAV4 vehicle had already been down there. Attorney Buting, objection, Your Honor. The witness can't testify what's going on in two places. On some place 2 hours away. Yeah, okay. Agreed. It's certainly not for the truth, Judge. It's did this officer do anything in response to that? Buting says, that's fine. The court says, all right, for that purpose, I will allow it. I was informed that day that to an initial processing of that vehicle that they had received a positive test for the presence of blood in the vehicle. All right, and did that further direct your search efforts and where to look and what you were looking for? Yes, certainly to a degree. Let's move to Monday the 7th of November. Tell the jury how this search effort progresses, please. Okay, Monday again, we started early in the morning. Volunteer firefighters are utilized again. I believe we have about 60 of them on the scene this day, coupled with about 20 law enforcement officers, the majority being from the Manitowoc Police Department, some of the Two Rivers Police Department, a few from Manitowoc County DCI agents, and Calumet County. Calumet County this was a day that they brought over jailers or dispatchers to assist in the search efforts. And again, what happened this day was a good majority of I believe the Mishicot Fire Department volunteers, along with DCI agents and possibly some law enforcement officers, went down by the crusher. And there were about 54 crushed cars down there, and they methodically went through every one of those crushed cars, apparently ripping off the roof of those cars and any closed areas to search those cars. What a waste of time and resources. Like, seriously, there's so many people come on, I don't know. After searching, they didn't find anything. And they moved the cars from the south side of the car crusher over to the north side. When they were done searching it, they had these tools to get into this and enable them to do this, whether it was jaws of life or cutting tools. All right, so you said that 54 crushed cars were near the car crusher. Is that right? That's my knowledge, yes. And understanding that all 54 were searched, yes. Do you know what they were looking for? Well, obviously a body or any indications of such, clothing or other things that were in the search warrant. Was anything at least brought to your attention as the lead investigator found in the search of those 54 crushed vehicles? No, sir. May I continue with Monday then? Counsel? Oh, wait, question. Counsel may... Oh, he wanted to continue with Monday. Shoot. No, sir. May I continue with Monday then? And then counsel may want me to do this a little bit more question and answer, so I will interject a couple of questions. Were there on-site and off-site teams that were formed that day? Yes. Did any of those off-site teams move forward, at least in their search efforts towards the 40-acre Avery property? I'm not sure I understand, but along with the teams that did the crushed cars, firefighters and law enforcement again coupled up into teams, and there was law enforcement with each team of firefighters, and they were searching the perimeter of this area, this 40-acre area just outside the perimeter and in that area, and working their way around either toward, depending where they started, or away from the property, again looking for anything that might be of obvious evidentiary value. Did they find anything that you are aware of? Yes. What was that? Toward the northwest section of the property, just north of Steven Avery's residence, there was a burn barrel located. One of those search teams found that burn barrel. Inside the burn barrel was a wheel, not the tire, but the axle or the rim part of the wheel that looked, they looked under that. What? Judge Buting, Buting's, Attorney Buting says, Judge, objection to what they did or didn't do if he is not there. These witnesses will be testifying later. I think he can describe this without getting into that kind of detail. I think that's fair, Judge. I will have him refer to the exhibit and tell me what he saw. Court says, I agree. The objection is sustained. Attorney Kratz says, in looking at 37, that's on the screen, is that the burn barrel that you're talking about? Yes. Can you point to it with your laser? Yes, right there. So that was discovered on Monday the 7th? Yes. Did you direct officers to take control, that is, to seize and otherwise process the contents of that burning barrel? Yes, DCI agents went down there and took control of that and ultimately released it to one of the evidence collection teams, and it was ultimately seized and taken in again in an enclosed trailer to the Calumet County Sheriff's Department for subsequent processing. Court says, excuse me, I'm not sure. Are you talking about the burn barrel was seized? Yes, the whole burn barrel. You spoke earlier of Agent Fassbender about some weapons, some firearms having been seized from Mr. Avery's property. Were there other firearms on the Avery salvage yard? Yes, sir, there were. Were those ever taken or seized? Yes. When did that happen? I think that ended up being a multi-day effort. Probably started on Monday and maybe even went through 2 or 3 days because firearms were located in each residence, in vehicles, in shops. So there was a multitude of firearms to take, and involved were safes, gun safes that had been opened. Jeez Louise. Okay, so now we're going to hear from crime lab witnesses perhaps in the next week or two, but on that Monday, without telling us what they told you, on that Monday, the 7th of November, did you receive a preliminary report from the crime lab regarding the processing of the SUV? I was in contact with the crime lab pretty much every day, and yeah, I received information on Monday. All right, we'll get from them what it is that they found on each day. The question, though, is when you would receive updates, daily updates from the crime lab, would you further direct your search efforts? Most definitely. Anything else happen on Monday that stands out in your mind of significance, either search efforts or off-site investigation efforts? Winnebago County dive teams were there again to conclude or finish their search of ponds, and by ponds, I'm talking about adjacent property quarries, gravel pits. Also on Monday, one of the teams or an individual officer, probably one of the teams, was directed to go into Steven Avery's trailer and obtain the serial number off of the computer in the trailer because he wanted to get a search warrant for that computer. All right. Let's move to the next day then, Tuesday, the 8th of November. Do you remember that day? Yes, I do. And before we do that, before he talks about that day, I'm fast forwarding us to Fassbender Cross because we still have a lot to go. All right, so now we're going to go, this is going to be Attorney Buting cross-examination. Good afternoon, Mr. Fassbender. Good afternoon. Let me go back to the beginning of your testimony about some of your experience for a few minutes, okay? Yes, 27 years as a law enforcement officer is a long time. Would you agree? Yes. Not that you are old yet, but it's a lot of experience, and I'm sure that we got clear. Was all of that with the DCI? 5 years of that was with the State Patrol. Okay, but always for the state, pretty much. Correct. And you did say that one of the functions of DCI is to help out other law enforcement departments all over the state, particularly smaller ones that may not have many detectives, right? Certainly. And coming from outside of an area, or you kind of have a different perspective, perhaps, than the local people who have been, in individual local departments. Yes, possibly. I mean, you are somewhat in a disadvantage when you talked about knowing local vendors and resources if you need tow trucks and what sort of thing, right? That sort of thing. Yes. So it's helpful to have those local departments available for that kind of assistance, certainly. Yes, sir. Okay, but in similar departments, sometimes you realize that there's probably some history between certain suspects and certain police departments. Certainly, that could be. Okay, you have the advantage of, though, coming on the scene without that kind of problem. You don't have any prior history with anybody who may be a suspect or person in this case, right? Yes, I like to think so. And in this case, when you were called in, you live in the Fox Cities area? Correct. Okay, so you watch the television stations from Green Bay, and that's where you get most of your media news? Yes, sir. And Appleton News, of course. So you knew this Teresa Halbach case, missing person case, and had already gotten quite a bit of publicity, right? I had seen bits and pieces, yes. Okay, and when you were called into this case, you knew that this was going to be a pretty high profile case. Would that be fair? Just based on Teresa missing or where you were being sent. The possibility, yes, existed. Okay, so you knew that your performance as an officer, you didn't at that point know you would be a lead investigator, did you know? No. But you knew that obviously your performance could be under the microscope, so to speak, of a high-profile case. My performance is always under a microscope, but more people may see it, yes. Okay, sure. So you wanted to make sure that it was a thorough investigation that you undertook, right? Yes. As complete an investigation as you could? Yes. And as you described it, this funnel approach, you wanted to be as thorough and get all leads and everything carefully investigated before you narrowed down to the bottom of the funnel, that one man, right? Generally, yes. Okay. Now you also knew, well, maybe you didn't. Did you know before you got assigned to the case and you went over to the Avery property? Were you aware of Mr. Avery, who he was? Yes. So you knew about the wrongful conviction and all the years in prison and all of that, right? Yes. And you knew that he had filed a lawsuit against Manitowoc County after that, right? I believe so. Well, was there talk in the law enforcement community in this whole area, northeastern Wisconsin, about that lawsuit at all? No, not from my experience. I guarantee it was talked about by everybody. I guarantee they all knew about it and had opinions about it. Okay, and didn't like it because they're cops and he's the other and he's coming after them. So, of course, they're not going to like it. I gotta sit up or move or something because my hips are really hurting me. Not so much my hips today, it's my tailbone. My sacrum gets really painful sometimes and it's hard to even sit at all. I mean, that's most days. It's hard to sit, but I really have to shift myself around. Sorry, I am making a ton of noise. I should just mute my mic and stop. All right. Sorry. Let's get back to it. All right, so not from my experience. Okay, so what you knew was not insider knowledge. It was just from the news. Essentially, I know DCI looked at something related to that. In fact, the Attorney General commissioned a report by your department. Yeah, the Attorney General. Okay, and she looked and focused on the wrongful conviction of Mr. Avery to try and see what, if anything went wrong, that could be determined. Although I wasn't involved in that, I believe so. Okay, and you knew then that after all that was done and all the information was gathered and additional facts were learned, Mr. Avery filed a lawsuit against Manitowoc County. Yes, I believe so. So he knew. He knew. And against Manitowoc County Sheriff or former sheriff. So I think that's Tom Kasarik is his name or something. He says, I'm not sure about that. I know it was Manitowoc County. I believe Manitowoc Sheriff too. Yes. Okay. All right. And then you arrive with that background and that knowledge and you come to the scene and the first thing you do is to go to the command post, which is right at the entranceway to the Avery property, right? Yes, sir. And you go through a debriefing I should say, with those in command, right? Yes. You mentioned Sheriff Pagel, Deputy Inspector Shetter, perhaps, was one of those you spoke with. Perhaps, I can't recall. Was Investigator Wiegert there? I don't think he was. I think he was obtaining a search warrant. Okay, Lieutenant Herman, maybe. I don't know. All right, but some upper brass, so to speak, in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, as well as the head of Calumet County. I definitely remember speaking with Sheriff Pagel, and I know I saw Deputy Inspector Shetter there. So those are the only two people he is confirming he saw. Okay, and Shetter is with Manitowoc Sheriff's Department and Pagel is with Calumet? Correct. And so you knew then that a determination had already been made before you arrived that there was a conflict of interest or an appearance of a conflict of interest for Manitowoc County to investigate Mr. Avery. Correct. So for that reason, Calumet had been turned hold on, I'm trying to scroll and it's just not, okay. So for that reason, Calumet had been turned, the lead investigation authority had been turned over to Calumet. Yes. And you, of course, wanted to do everything you could within your knowledge to try and make this investigation a fair one, right? Yes, sir. You didn't want to go into this and set up some kind of investigation that would have an appearance of unfairness, right? I didn't want to set up an investigation that was unfair. Okay, much less the appearance. And this was a high-profile case. You didn't want the public to think that you were leading an investigation that appeared to be unfair or biased in some way against the gentleman who had sued Manitowoc County. I don't know if I agree with that. I was concerned about finding the truth, not about the press, not about the people, what people thought, and I made decisions based on that. Okay, well, you should have thought about the fact that you had officers from a county that were being sued by the man whose property you were standing on. All right, at any rate, in order to try and ensure that there was a fair investigation, you kind of looked around and made some decisions that a few things had to be changed that hadn't been done yet, right? I'm not sure what you're asking. All right, I will be more specific. I'm sorry. When you arrived at the property at 2:25 p.m., you drove right into the command post and didn't have to sign in or sign out initially, did you? As I answered before, I don't recall. All right, and let me just mark something and show it to you. Exhibit number 142, marked for identification. All right, showing you what's been marked now as 142. Does that look at all familiar to you? Yes, I have seen this. Okay, and can you tell the jury what it is? That's one of the logs I was talking about, a sign-in log, sign-out log. Okay, at the seat. Okay, and this particular one, I think actually says, no, this one doesn't say exactly where it is, but does this one appear to be one that was taken up at the intersection of Highway 147 and Avery Road, or does this look like one that was from somewhere else? This looks like the one that was started down by the car crusher, I believe, that staging area below. Okay, so everybody who came down in that area had to sign in there. I would hope so. Okay, the very first entry is what? DCI agents Hunsander and Fassbender at 2:25 p.m. and then some initials. Okay, so this log in any event appears to have been started right with your arrival. Yes, and that's good police practice to do that, right? Certainly. And then have a record of everybody who comes and goes, right? Yes. And it has got an exact date and time that someone comes, right? Correct. And that applies to officers. Yes. No matter what their rank is? Yes. Even the top dog sheriff has to sign the log like this, right? They should. In order to get past that checkpoint, you would have to sign in if you were going in and out in the normal way, right? You should, yes, if you are going by that checkpoint. Well, unless you were eluding the checkpoint in some way and coming in at a different location, you would really have to sign in, wouldn't you? Yes. The guard on the office or the officer who's there says, doesn't let anybody by without signing in? Correct. And now you said that you had seen this document before. Have you had a chance in the past to go through it with much detail? No, probably not. I'm going to show it to you for a minute. If you could look at it, please. The court says, is this still Exhibit 142? Mr. Booting says, yes, it is. All right, would you make a note of the last page, which is toward the end of the day when people are signing off? You said around 10 people were knocking off on, this is the first Friday, November 5th. I'm sorry, Saturday, November 5th. Yes? Yes, okay. Most of the investigation detectives were leaving around 10-ish, something like that. 10, 11, sure. Okay, and towards the bottom there, it says, would you read that line, please? In military time, 22:41 hours, Lieutenant Lank, Detective Remaker, Sergeant Colburn out. And then must be a call number of the officer that was in control of the log, 492. Okay, and 2241, is that a regular civilian? Or what is that in regular civilian? That's 1041. Okay. PM. All right. So the log shows that Lieutenant Lank signed out from the checkpoint at 10:41 p.m. on November 5th, correct? Yes, if that is all November 5th, yes. Okay, well, if you take a minute and look through there and show me where Lieutenant Lank signed in, if at all. Attorney Kratz says, Judge, I'm going to object. This assumes a fact that's not in evidence that Lieutenant Lank was there before 2:25. Attorney Booting says, well, we're establishing this. Kratz says, well, if you're establishing that at all, that would be hearsay. If that's what he's using it for, he's assuming a fact that's not in evidence. The court says, I understand the question to relate simply to whether or not there is a sign in for Mr. Lank at some earlier point. Attorney Kratz says, with respect to the court and counsel, then he should ask that question, Judge, not show me where Lieutenant Lank signed in if he's on the form. If he's not on the form. Hold on. If he's on the form. All right. The court says, I will allow you to go into this in redirect, so you can address it later when you're back up. Thank you, Judge. And the question is, do you see an entry that Lieutenant Lank signed in anywhere on that log on November 5th? No, sir, I did not. All right, now correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free, but there's a couple of possibilities of why this might be. One is that Detective Lank bypassed the checkpoint somehow, right? Yes, that checkpoint. And you have testified already that this is the checkpoint to get in that area and no one is supposed to come and go without getting checked in, right? In that particular area down by the car crusher, yes. Okay, and the car crusher is the closest checkpoint, one of the closest checkpoint areas to the RAV4, right? Correct. Another possibility is that Lieutenant Link arrived and was at the scene before that log was even begun, right? Right. Do you know Detective Link before this investigation? Did you know him? No. So, did you know him by sight at all before this investigation? Would you be able to recognize him if he showed up at the Avery salvage yard? No, I don't believe so. Okay, do you know whether you saw this person, now known as Lieutenant Link, at the Avery salvage when you arrived at 2? I don't recall. Okay, so you have no recollection of seeing him arrive yourself. No recollection. Or a recollection of him being there when you arrived? Correct. Okay, by the way, if I may divert for just a second, you said when you talked about putting together some teams, you said that you had actually trained certain individuals in one of these evidence processing teams for Manitowoc. A couple of them. Would you tell me the names of those people? So Detective Remacher and Sergeant Colburn. And we're going to listen to or go through their testimony too. Okay. Not in evidence. He says not in evidence collection. Not in evidence collection? No. So whatever personal knowledge you had about their training had nothing to do with their skill in their specific field of collecting evidence. Correct. Okay, when you came into this case, I assume you were not considering the possibility that some law enforcement officer would actually plant evidence against Mr. Avery, were you? No. Have you ever encountered a case where you had to deal with this issue? I worked in public corruption for 12 years with white-collar crime and planting evidence. I don't believe I have ever had a police officer do that. All right, so when you came to the scene, your focus was not on making sure that no police officer would do something that bad, like plant evidence, right? That wasn't part of your focus when you arrived. Certainly. Okay. Attorney Buting says, I'm sorry, counsel, could we put up Exhibit 86 again, our most common exhibit so far? All right, could you show us, anyway, where this checkpoint area was? Strike that. Show me where, when you drove down to the RAV4 area or the southeast corner of that property, show me where you parked. Or did you drive or walk? I'm sorry. I believe the first time I went down there, I drove. Okay, and show me about where you parked. Could you maybe zoom it in a level? Okay, that's good. I believe it was probably right in this area. All right, so we're going to scroll through some of this because it's boring. All right, so in any event, from the crusher, from where you parked, would be at least somewhat closer to the location of the RAV4 than it would be if you were all the way at the crusher itself, by however many feet you parked away. Yes. Okay, and from that distance you indicated you were still quite a distance away, right? Yes. And so much of, and so much so that you pulled out some binoculars to be able to view the RAV4 from that distance. I didn't pull out some binoculars. I think someone at the scene had some and they let me use them. Okay, well at this point you think it was 2:25, so your understanding was that the first officers arrived at 11? I believe so. And this was, so you described it at that point. I think you said this on direct, this RAV4 was at that point the major piece of evidence on the property that you knew of. Yes, that was it. That's the focus. That's the missing woman's car. Yes, right? Okay, yes. And when you arrived up there, having already been briefed at the command post, you knew about this issue with the appearance of a conflict for Manitowoc County, right? Correct. And then, yet, you discovered that it wasn't until 3 approximately that a Calumet deputy took over responsibility for trying to secure the major pieces of evidence. I don't know that for sure as I sit here, but it may have been. Well, maybe just so the record is clear, you have one advantage of being a witness here today in that you haven't been sequestered, right? Correct. So he's been watching the trial. You have been able to sit here at the trial along with Mr. or Investigator Wiegert and hear most of the testimony, right? Correct. And you heard, I think it was with Sergeant Orth, testimony that there was at 3:04 p.m., or maybe it was Lieutenant Herman, I may be mistaken, that it was 3:04 p.m. that Manitowoc Deputy Sheriff Cummings transferred responsibility for security of that vehicle to the Calumet County Deputy. I'm not disputing it, I just don't independently recall that bit of testimony. You don't recall the time or don't recall the testimony. When he said what time he turned it over. So you wouldn't disagree with me that it was 3. I have no reason to. Okay, so did it cause you concern that for 4 hours the major piece of evidence in this case was under the control of the very department that had already been determined to have a conflict of interest in this case? Attorney Kratz says, objection, Judge. I think it's mischaracterization. The word conflict is, in fact, mischaracterization. Attorney Booting says, I will rephrase it. I know what counsel is talking about. Question, did it cause you concern for 4 hours the major piece of evidence in this case was under the control and security of the one department that itself determined to have an appearance of conflict of interest? No, I didn't. Nah, didn't bother me. Whatever. I was not involved in that decision making. I knew that officers were on the scene protecting that scene. So, who? Because you were supposed to be looking at it. You weren't involved in that decision making at all because that took place before you got there. Correct. Okay, and the fact you were trying to shape things up a bit and make sure that logs were taken and all of that when you arrived. I suggested a log be kept. Okay, so it didn't concern you that there was going to be an appearance that the fox was guarding the hen house, so to speak. Is that right? Absolutely not. Okay, well, did you suggest that Manitowoc back off and that Calumet deputy take over? Was that part of your decision? I don't believe so. It happened, but I don't believe that was specifically my decision. So it was just coincidental that it happened around the time you arrived? Probably, yes. I smell BS. All right, now at that point, you were already designated as co-lead investigator of this case. No, I don't think so. I think that happened when Detective Wiegert got back and I can't remember when exactly, if it was after Brutus alerted or before, but we were having a briefing at the command center and a determination was made and we were asked to do that. Okay, so that's all right. That's fine. So that was after Investigator Wiegert came back with a search warrant? Yes, and that was about 3:35, I believe, right? I believe so, 3:25, 3:35, and it was even later than that, I believe. So the designation was later than that, yes. So, sure, I understand. So then, just so we're clear, when you got there, the leader of the investigation, Investigator Wiegert, was not present on the property. He was not present. I don't even know if he was a leader or not, but he was not present. And there were no prosecutors present. When I got there, I can't remember. I know they were there at some time. I just can't remember if they were there then. Well, if you can look at Exhibit 142, see if that refreshes your recollection as to when any of the district attorneys involved returned to the property. I see an indication at what appears to be 3:22. 3:22? 3:22 p.m. Manitowoc County District Attorney and Assistant District Attorney on the scene. That is not saying whether they were there earlier than 2:25 or not. Okay. What about Mr. Kratz or his assistant? 4:03 p.m. Assistant District Attorney from Calumet County, Jeffrey Froelich. And then there's an entry at 417 for both district attorneys returned. All right. That's good enough for now, I guess. So during that investigation, or during that period of time then, until Investigator Wiegert came back with a search warrant, or until the district attorneys came, did you view yourself as sort of an agent in control or not? You were still an outsider, so to speak. Yes, I did not view myself as an agent in control of anything. Okay, that's fine. At some point, though, that did happen. And Sheriff Poggle, I believe it was, requested you to be co-leader? Probably yes. And then you mentioned that you had some meetings and discussions about trying to develop some kind of search plan? Yes. And the first thing you did was this. You called it a sweep of all the properties, right? Correct. And like you said, this was a missing person case still, but you came into this thinking something more, didn't you? Yes, based on what I knew at the time, plus to me, just good practices to do that. Like you expect the worst and hope for the best. So you plan for the worst. Okay, something more, even including a homicide, right? True. And in fact, the search warrant applications that were prepared told the court they were looking for evidence, including evidence of a possible homicide, right? Correct. And that took place even before you got to the scene? Yes. Okay, and so in part because of that, I believe you testified on direct that you wanted to make sure that you didn't miss anything in this investigation, that it could be a lot more than just a missing person, it could be homicide. So you wanted to make sure that nobody missed anything, right? You try to do that as a concept, you go with it, that mentality. All right, let me go through some of these searches briefly with you. If I told you that on November 5th at 3:48 p.m., the first entry was made to Mr. Avery's trailer for this sweep type search, does that fit with your recollection? That sounds right. Detective Remacher and Deputy Stayer. Yes. Two of them went in. It was a quick 10 minutes in and out of the building looking to see if there was a live person there. Teresa, right? Yes. And then they went to the other buildings and you know doors were being kicked in if necessary to get in because you were looking for, hopefully, still a live person. Yes. There were multiple teams, not just that one team, I think. Okay. And then immediately after they left Mr. Avery's residence, the trailer, the same team immediately went right into the detached garage sitting next to his trailer as well. I think so. Again, a quick entry, look around to see if there's anybody there, alive or otherwise. Yes. But in neither instance was anything seized, not that I know of. Okay, and then you did mention that I think the next level of searches sort of right after the sweep, and the sweep was also to make sure that there's nobody there that could harm the officers, show some gunmen or armed gunmen or something like that, right? For our protection, yes. That's a routine procedure, correct. Okay, but the next level of search after that was these dogs. You said there were like 9 cadaver or human remains type dogs. A combination of human remains mixed and live. So all different kinds of dogs, but search dogs. Yes. And they started going through everything, right, as quickly as they could, primarily the vehicles in the salvage yard. Okay, and we heard about this indication or alert that this dog Brutus did in the bathroom of Mr. Avery's trailer, right? Yes. You heard that testimony today. Yes. But you were aware that there were other alerts, many alerts, all over the property, right? There were other alerts, yes, including right in front of the front door of Chuck Avery's trailer residence, right? Correct. Now, Chuck Avery, Mr. Avery's brother, also lived on the property, right? Yes, and in fact, his trailer is the closest trailer to the RAV4 that was considered closest residence, right? Maybe if you could zoom out. Yes, okay, so could you point where Chuck Avery's residence was on there, or is And I will have to squint a little bit here, but I think it's right there. Okay, and it's this picture again, but it's so hard to see anything because 40 acres. You can see Steven's trailer in the like bottom right hand corner of the property. And all the big buildings are where you would enter. That's like where Avery Road starts, I think. All the bigger buildings. Anyways, sorry. All right, so okay. And there were other hits, other buildings and cars and kinds of all over the place initially, right? Yes. So it's not like Steven Avery's bathroom where he shaves is the only place that any dog alerted on the 40-acre property. Yes, sir, that's correct. All right. Okay. Then you broke up into teams. Well, actually, let me go back for just a minute before a number of times, let me just clarify. A number of times you said this was a general search plan that you were just trying to put together at the stage, right? Beginning with the sweeps? Yeah, the whole plan for when you got there. Trying to put a plan together, certainly, yes. And that it was fluid and it adjusted based on new information you might get or not get, right? Throughout the entire time we had that property, yes. Okay, well, I think you said on direct, though, that you weren't, when you set up that very first plan, that you really weren't sure what you were searching for. We had a search warrant that indicated items that we were searching for. Right, and in that search warrant, you took us off a little with an example of a case where some pathologist told you maybe look for a knife with a serrated blade or something, right? Correct. In this case, though, you didn't have that kind of information yet. That's right. You said you were looking at this investigation already as a homicide potentially. Yes, and your search warrant told you to look for any kind of instrumentologies that could cause a homicide, including knives, right? Yes. Firearms? Yes. Whatever else could be used, items to bludgeon someone, something like that, right? Correct. So the officers did know to look for all of those kinds of items at least. They could have, yes. All right. So then after the first entries, after the very first brief sweep of Mr. Avery's trailer, you then sat down to put together a team who could actually start collecting evidence, search and collect evidence, not just do these sweeps. Yes. And again, I'm assuming that foremost in your mind was that you wanted to make sure that this was going to be a fair investigation and a fair search of anyone's property on that 40-acre parcel, right? Of course. And so you would not knowingly have assigned officers to certain duties if you had known that they might be in a situation where there's an appearance of a conflict of interest, right? Again, I have trouble with the word appearance. If there's a definite conflict of interest, that would be a concern of mine. There is a definite conflict of interest. Oh my God, you should obviously think that this is a conflict of interest, but he says it's not. Seriously. All right, well, let me ask in this way, sir. Did you know on that day, November 5th, when you are putting this team of searchers together, did you know that Lieutenant Lank had been deposed as a witness in Mr. Avery's civil lawsuit just 3 weeks earlier? No, I didn't. Did you know that Sergeant Sergeant Andrew Colburn had also been deposed as a witness just 3 weeks earlier? No, I didn't. And neither Sergeant Colburn nor Lieutenant Link told you, though. Blah, 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 blah. Say that again. And neither Sergeant Colburn nor Lieutenant Link told you that fact, did they? Not to my recollection, no. As a matter of fact, when did you first learn that they had been deposed? Was it at my behest? It may have been. I don't know if I knew before then at a hearing. A hearing in August? That may have been. That was the first time anybody told you, hey, these guys were deposed as witnesses with Mr. Avery sitting right there. I don't remember if that was the first time. All right, but surely you didn't know it anyway on November 5th, correct? And if you had known that, if you had known that these two officers who you were assigning to go into Mr. Avery's residence, a person of interest, if you had known that those two officers had been deposed as witnesses in that civil case, you would not have assigned them to that duty, would you? That's not correct. Based on what I know now, I'm asking you your knowledge then. Are you telling me that you would have, even if they had told you, if you had known that they were witnesses in the civil case, you would have still assigned Link and Colburn to the evidence team that went into Mr. Avery's residence? Number one, I needed evidence technicians. Number two, I would have asked, Your Honor, Jerry Buting says, them what it related to. Attorney Buting says, this is a yes or no answer. He can explain it on redirect. The court says that's correct. It is a yes or no answer based on, I guess, repeat the question again. I'm saying yes. You are saying that even if you had known that Lank and Coburn had been witnesses in the civil lawsuit 3 weeks earlier deposed in Mr. Avery's civil lawsuit, you would have still assigned them to go search Mr. Avery's residence. There's more to the answer you want. Yes, I will tell you yes right now, but there's more to that answer. All right. Well, let me talk about what your resources were. You, by that time, had other people who could go in that Mr. Avery's residence and search, didn't you? We were looking for trained evidence technicians, and we put a team together with them. I don't know of any other people that I would have used for that, really. So out of the hundreds of departments of people that you have, you would still use the corrupt people that were interviewed in a civil suit for Manitowoc County and Steven Avery. Well, you had another team, didn't you? You had another team search other areas, other buildings on the property. On Saturday, no. The crime lab was there, but they were busy with the vehicle. All right. You had the property for a week? Yes. You went in and out of this trailer. We'll get into how many times during that week. There's would have been no reason for you to rush to search Mr. Avery's trailer without waiting a few more moments for the crime lab specialist to come and search it. On Saturday or another day? Saturday. Or even wait until another day. I mean, you already knew that Teresa wasn't inside. I had a capable and qualified team that could go in there and do the job. All right. I sent them in there. And there were certainly other buildings on that property where other people resided that did not have a civil lawsuit that required the testimony at a deposition of Mr. Link and Mr. Colburn, right? Yes. Chuck Avery, let's just look at him for a second. It's another residence where the dog alerted, right? Yes. Could I have sent Link and Coburn in there could have sent Link and Coburn in there and have someone else go into Mr. Avery's residence to, again, make sure that there's no appearance or some funny business going on. Saturday? Yes. A possibility. I'm looking at other bits of information also when I'm determining where we're sending in our first team. Well, you sent the first team to Mr. Avery's because you said that was the obvious place to start, based on several reasons. All right, let's look at those a little bit. I think right before that, if I recall, you said that Mr. Avery was not the only person being investigated. Correct. But that you felt he was the most obvious place to start. I had to pick a place to start. The person who last saw that person alive was a pretty logical place to start. But you have done many homicide investigations over the years, right? That depends on what you term as many. I'm not going to say I have done hundreds of homicide investigations. but you have done enough. You know about certain patterns. For instance, often the most obvious suspect in a homicide is the spouse. You look at the spouse, right, too? Yes, the people we love the most. Or you look at the boyfriend or an ex-boyfriend, Brian Hilligus. You don't, or don't you? Yes. Or how about a roommate? Yes. How about a roommate who doesn't report the missing victim for 3, almost 4 days? Yes. That would be somebody you would want to investigate. That's a possible area to look at. You think? Did you look at them? The roommate who never reported her missing and the boyfriend who is always around? That would be somebody you want to ask for an alibi. Attorney Kratz says, Judge, I'm going to interpose an objection. If counsel really wants to get in a true motive, I think this going to require advanced rulings. I would like to either be heard outside the presence of the jury, or I would object to this line of questioning as it deals with directly with whatever. The court says, all right, the court is going to excuse the jurors for a few moments, and the jury's not present. I'm going to skip through this because... Oh, no, wait. Okay, so thank you, Your Honor. The defense has now introduced into this trial motive. That is, asking this officer why what Mr. Buting has now identified as several individuals who might have an obvious motive to end the life of Ms. Halbach. The state at this court knows earlier in this case offered specific evidence. It's called other acts evidence to prove Mr. Avery's motive. Now that the defense has opened the door, now that the defense has suggested that other people have motive, the inferences that Mr. Avery does not, that is a reasonable inference for the jury to draw. Based upon Mr. Buting's questioning of this witness, I am at this time then, Judge, going to ask the court revisit or at least allow additional argument on the issue of other acts evidence. If Mr. Buting, who believes that motive is at issue, Mr. Buting and the defense now believe that motive should be considered by this jury as part of the case, and at least by that inference that Mr. Avery does not have a motive, the state would once again re-offer those items which we specifically offered in pretrial attempts to address Mr. Avery's motive directly. This court has heard through our opening statement that we were not going to raise motive as an issue, that we have stayed away because of the court's previous rulings on this entire issue, but now that Mr. Buting and now that the defense has raised the issue of motive, I'm going to ask the court to revisit those issues. Mr. Buting, Judge, I have done nothing of the sort. What we're doing here is cross-examination of this officer who testified that Mr. Avery was the obvious choice of where to start the investigation. All we're talking about is what's going through his head at that day, that time, in terms of where to allocate his resources, and I'm demonstrating his bias towards Mr. Avery and focus on Mr. Avery to the exclusion of others. That's all this is going into. There's no motive otherwise being introduced. The court says, all right, I will make a couple of comments. First of all, the court, by denying the state's other acts motion, did not prohibit the state from introducing any evidence relating to motive. Rather, the court simply denied the particular mechanisms, if you will, that were proposed by the state for other reasons related to the law involving the admission of other acts evidence. I'm so tired of reading. All right, so with respect to the questions posed by the defense at this point, they don't involve any offer of intrinsic evidence and therefore, at least at this time, did not raise a Denny issue. Remember, Denny is bringing in another, like a third-party culprit. And Denny is the case that they use as a sample, or as the example, I should say. There's like 3 prongs that you have to meet in order to have it be, in order to bring in someone from, basically to point the finger at somebody specific. You can say other people did this, not my client. I don't know who did it, but you can't say that person right there in the green shirt that's sitting in the audience did it. You can't be specific in Wisconsin for some reason. That's the Denny motion, or the Denny rule. All right, so the court is well aware of its prior ruling, and I will keep my ears open in the event that that happens, but I don't believe it's happened to this point. The focus of the questioning, as I understand it to this point, rather goes to decisions that the officer made in the investigation of this matter and other paths of investigation that could have been followed. So I'm going to overrule the objection at this point. If the state believes it's going too far again, I will reconsider it again. All right. At this point, I really want to finish Buting's Cross. I want to see how far we are. Because redirect, we're on page 174. Redirect starts at 208. Okay, good. Let's go back to 174. I mean, that's still a lot. So we're not going to read all of this, but maybe a little bit more. So the jury comes back. The court says, "You may be seated." Mr. Buting continues. "Thank you. I believe we left off with you saying, yes, you would certainly like to investigate it. These are the people you were talking about, roommate or boyfriend. That is an avenue that would be approached absent other circumstances." So he's saying because they didn't already have Avery in their sights, they would have looked at the boyfriend. All right. And you wouldn't also, where am I seeing you? And wouldn't you also want to, so you don't miss anything, as you said, investigate an employer who doesn't report an employee missing for 3 days? In relation to the employer reporting related to this case, this case, that would be something you would look into possibly. All right. But at any rate, you decided that the first place you would start would be Mr. Avery's trailer residence. Based on information I had, yes. All right. And you put together actually a team of 4 investigators, or 4 officers, correct? A team of 4 officers was put together, yes. Whether I did it specifically, I don't recall. So 3 of those 4 officers are Manitowoc Sheriff Department employees, right? 2 investigators and 1 officer or sergeant, yes. And they are Lieutenant Lank, Sergeant Colburn, and Detective Remacher, yes. And then you also had a Calumet Sergeant Tyson, yes, as part of the team. And that team entered Mr. Avery's residence at 7:30 p.m. on November 5th, Saturday, yes. And they didn't leave until 10:05. That's correct. Those 4 officers searching Mr. Avery's residence for over 2.5 hours? Yes. Both sides are having trouble with the electronics in this courtroom, I'm afraid. Let me try something else. Whatever. Exhibit 102. I think, yes, we heard testimony about this animation before, right? That's correct. And this is accurate, I guess, to the inch or half inch or something like that. Is that what we heard? Zoom out a little. There we go. This is the sun. Okay, so zoom out. They're having issues with it. What does it say? So this is the sum total of residences that you had 4 officers in for 2.5 hours on the evening of the 5th, correct? Yes. And at that time, you were looking for any evidence, including evidence of a possible homicide? Yes, sir. You were looking for blood, right? Yes. Certainly any indication maybe that Teresa Halbach had been in the residence, correct? It's a rather small area to search as residents go, don't you think? I suppose, yes. And they seized 50-some items on that occasion, right? I don't know how many items they seized on that occasion. And from your knowledge of the investigation later, none of those items were in any way linked to Miss Halbach, were they? That's probably true. I'm not positive. Okay, well, we'll follow through with that in a minute. And then they left and quit for the night, and the next day they went to search Mr. Avery's garage. Is that right? Yes. Makeup of a team of a little different, though, I think. The makeup of the team was a little different, though, I think. I'm sorry, you're right. It was Lieutenant Lank, Sergeant Colburn, Remacher, and the same three Manitowoc officers, right? Correct. At this time, they were with Deputy Kacharski, I believe is the way you pronounce it, from Calumet. Yes. So 4 more officers this time searching this one-room garage. Is that right? Yes. For 1 hour and 47 minutes. Does that sound right? I don't know. Sounds right. If I told you they entered at 8 a.m. and left at 9:47 a.m. on November 6th, Sunday morning, would you disagree with that? No, I wouldn't. You also mentioned that later that day on Sunday, after briefing with you, you determined that the officers had seen a couple of firearms in Mr. Avery's residence and you wanted to send them back in to retrieve those items, right? They talked about several items, and yes, we did want to. And so the same team of four officers, Remacher, Lank, Colburn, and Kacharski, went back into Mr. Avery's residence at 12:25 on November 6th and left at 12:48 p.m. Would you disagree with that? No, I wouldn't. So 23 minutes in his residence. Again, right? Correct. That's now the fourth entry into Mr. Avery's trailer. Yes, sir. By law enforcement officers. Correct. And then later that evening, Saturday evening, you can put the trailer back on. So he puts the picture of the trailer. Later that evening, you had a team from the crime lab go back into Mr. Avery's residence, the 5th entry, right? Yes. Okay, so 5 times now they've gone in. Okay, and that's when you said that they came in with alternate light sources and things of that nature to try and see if there might be other, blood stains or something like that they may have missed. That night, they were looking for blood patterns. It's a different night that they used the luminol. And they indicated a few areas that they thought your officers should at least collect. Maybe they are important, maybe they are not. Correct. But they didn't themselves collect it. They left it for the officers? To my knowledge, yes. And then you said the next day, which would have been Monday, November 7th, Sergeant Lank and Sergeant Coburn and Sergeant Tyson went back into Mr. Avery's residence again for the computer to take the serial number off the computer. If I told you that they were in there for 7 minutes at 9:57 to 10:04 a.m., would that fit with your recollection? Yes. Now, that's the 6th entry. Yes. By law enforcement to Mr. Avery's residence, right? Yes. The following day, the team comes in a little bit smaller. At this time, it's just Lieutenant Lank and Sergeant Coburn and Deputy Kacharski, right? Yes. This is Tuesday morning, November 8th. If I told you that they entered at 8:25 a.m. and left at 12:18 p.m., holy crap, what were they doing there? Would that fit with your recollection? 8:25? I'm not sure about when they left. All right. And that was the 7th entry to Mr. Avery's residence, and that's the entrance that this key was supposedly discovered by Lieutenant Lank, right? Yes, sir. 7 searches. I guess 7 times is the charm for planting evidence. That had been missed in 6 other entries, correct? Yes. And we hear how it was discovered and how obvious it was later. I'm not going to ask you about that because you weren't present for the discovery of the key, were you? That's correct. So you arrived and they said, hey, we have got this key. It's a Toyota key, and you rushed to strike that. You come immediately to take a look at the key and whether or not something else should have been done with it, right? What should be done with it? Yes. Okay, and you mentioned, let's send it to the crime lab and see if it will start the ignition of Ms. Halbach's vehicle. That's right. And then I'm going to go through this quickly. On November 9th, you sent Lieutenant Lank, Sergeant Coburn, and Calumet Deputy Wendling back into Mr. Avery's residence, again, looking for a garage door opener. I think you said it was, or some things like that. Yes, it was a garage door opener, because What was it? There was garage door opener found in Teresa Halbach's RAV4. Yes, and there was some concern that maybe that was the person who had entered her, right? That was the thought. And so we looked around the property, not just Stephen's residence, to see if we could locate whether they were. In fact, we actually brought that thing up, I think the next day or the day after, to see if it opened any garage door. And it turned out to open Teresa's own garage door. Yes. You didn't even try that one first? So it was unrelated to the crime. Yes. And then again, later on November 9th, Lank and Coburn and Wendling went back in for 10 minutes. So now this is what, the ninth search? Or ninth time in the house looking for something, a missing tool? Does that ring a bell? 10:40 to 11:51. That I don't recall. They went in a garage. Okay. That was November 8th when they were looking for a garage. I'm sorry, they were looking for a tool that was missing from a kit that was in Teresa Halbach's car, right? Right. That was my recollection, is that kind of ran together. This tool was discovered earlier, and that was kind of ongoing, and they went in Stephen's trailer to look for the garage door opener and some pair of women's gloves, I believe. Then they went into the garages, and I think they went into Barb's, into her garage, to look for this tool. Okay, so let me just finish up with the residence first, and then go back to the garage. You do recall, though, that there was another entry, which would now be the ninth entry to Avery's residence on November 9th. November 9th being Wednesday? Yes. And that was the garage door opener? Yes. Okay, and then you obtained a second warrant, right? And then thereafter, he says yes, and then thereafter, Mr. Avery's residence was again entered 3 more times. On the 12th for 2 hours and 4 minutes by Trooper Austin to take measurements for those helpful animated computer diagrams, right? Yes. And again on November 12th, this time yourself entering briefly looking for some kind of document, right? I think myself and 2 of the other investigators looking for some documents, yes. And then I think you did one more quick run through at 9:30 on November 12th, shortly before the property was re-released to the Averys, right? Yes, generally you do a final sweep. I count 12 entries to Mr. Avery's trailer during that week by law enforcement. Would you disagree with that? No. Okay. Going back to the garage, I'm not sure. I think I said that there was the first sweep entry of the garage, right? Yes, on the 5th. And then the next morning, when the 4 officers spent almost 2 hours in that little garage on November 6th, right? Yes. And then there was also one looking for the tool on the 8th. Yes. Lasted about 24 minutes. Would you agree with that? I'm not sure if that was the 8th or the 9th, one of those two. I thought it was the 9th when they were looking for that emergency roadside tool. Okay, and it wasn't found, right? They found a bag that had tools like it in this, on a samurai in there, but did not ultimately match up to what we were looking for. And then, without belaboring the point here too much, the garage, Mr. Avery's garage, was entered again on November 9th for 19 minutes. November 10th, briefly looking for a hacksaw blade. Do you remember that? Yes, I believe Agent Sturtevant had done that. And on November 12th, one final time before you release the property. Yes. So I count 6 entries to his garage by law enforcement during that week. Would you agree with that? 5 or 6. I wasn't counting along. All right. Judge, do you want me to take an afternoon break? Might be a good time. All right. We'll take our afternoon recess. Yikes. Okay. Cross-examination. This is good. Couple things I wanted to clear up. You mentioned that some firearms, one of the entries to Mr. Avery's residence was to secure the couple firearms and a vacuum brush or something like that. Do you remember that? Yes. And that there were other firearms also on the buildings, other residences. Yes, buildings, residences, cars, including one of the firearms taken from Mr. Avery's residence was a .22 Marlin rifle. From Stephen's residence? From Stephen's. I'm sorry, from Steven Avery's residence. Yes. There were also two other 22 Marlin rifles found elsewhere on the property, right? Did you say two others? Right. I know there is another Marlin Glenfield or something that was in Bobby Dassey's bedroom. I'm not sure if that's where it was, if that's where one was. I'm not aware of the other Marlin if there was one. Barb John does? No. No? All right. So you also mentioned at one point, I think on November 8th, that the Wisconsin Crime Lab had to be diverted to some potential burial site. Yes, some searches that were being conducted off of the perimeter, off the Avery properties, had come across a suspicious area that they thought, and I think the dogs actually went by it, that it could be, or could have been a clandestine burial site. So just to clear up, so the jury is not speculating about that. That turned out to be nothing, right? That's correct. Okay. Now, one of the things that you did, let's go back to the 5th, to the RAV4 site again. Could we put up number 86 again? You mentioned it looked like it was threatening, like it might rain. And so you were concerned about the elements of the RAV4 and all that, right? Yes. And I'm going to show you Exhibit 118 that you identified yesterday. Just take a look, and then I'm going to put that one up on the screen. So exhibit, also show you exhibit that's a picture 118 is when the tarp is just being started to be put over the RAV. Is that right? It's either when it's being put on or taken off. Okay. It's not completely off, right? You are actually in it, right? Yes. You were wearing the red? Yes. I just don't know if it's on or off, coming on or off. Okay, and let me put that up on the screen while you take a look at those other two exhibits and see if you can identify those. All right. Buting says zoom in. Okay, whatever. Now, once again, just so no one is confused here, especially the jury, this picture is taken, Exhibit 86, is after the RAV4 had been removed from the scene entirely. This is like a different day, right? Yes. Could you point where the RAV4 was right next to the red vehicle? Yes. Okay, so those are what we're going to put up on the Elmo in a second, but those are photos taken from some place on the north side of the pond looking towards the RAV4 while it is still there on November 5th, right? I believe so. All right, then let's just try the Elmo if you don't mind. All right, where we were saying that the tarp is part way on or part way off, whatever, that this is the photo we were talking about, right? Yes. And this one is apparently taken from a position somewhere east of the vehicle looking west. That's right. Now at some point though, the RAV4 was almost completely covered by the tarp contraption, right? It was a tarp that we tried to put over the vehicle without touching it, so we were using surrounding trees or whatever, or cars, sure. To do that, so it was more like a cover canopy type thing that we were trying to accomplish. Okay, and so we haven't seen any pictures yet of what it looked like when it had, I think it was probably more than one tarp. Not that I remember. You think it was just all one tarp? I thought it was. If we used two, I don't recall. Okay, I'm showing you 144 first, and again, as you testified a moment ago, this is a picture that was taken from some position. Apparently looks like it was about just on the other side of the detention pond, looking kind of southwest. Yes, okay, this is boring. Let's get to like something juicy again. That's what I kept reading for. All right, so and the Toyota RAV4 enclosed or covered by the tarps? Yes. So again, one standing over in this area watching what might have been going on or just taking a look at the scene wouldn't have been able to see the RAV4 at all because it was covered. Is that right? Yes. So the tarps, Your Honor, would it be all right if I publish these to the jury? We don't, what does he say? We don't have slides of these? Sure. You didn't ask me to do that. I couldn't find any, blah, blah, blah. Ooh, they went off the record. All right, so back to questioning. Jerry Buting says, okay, that is 144. Now we're looking at the screen. It's 144, I believe, doesn't it? Yeah, and then could you just leave it there for a minute? So the purpose for the tarp, at least as far as you were concerned, was to try and protect the vehicle from the elements if it started raining, right? The vehicle, the items covering or concealing it, yes. And so you tried to drape these over branches and things not actually touching it, correct? So that there was room around it, like particularly in between the vehicles, and almost looks like that's a tent type opening or something on the side, right? I don't know. All right. I don't know why he's talking so much about this. I don't want to talk about exhibits. What does he say here? All right, now when you search the property, I mean, you walked around the property over the course of a week, right? And you became familiar yourself with various buildings and their locations. To a degree, we were quite busy in the command center that we didn't do a lot, but to a degree. Well, were you aware from the searches that there was an aluminum smelter located on the property? I was informed of that. I never saw it personally. Let me mark this and see if this refreshes your recollection. I'm showing you Exhibit 145. Tell me if you have ever seen that or ever saw that during that week. No. Okay. Well, we'll save the exhibit then. Nevertheless, you were told that there was an aluminum smelter on the property. Yes. And that, in fact, at some point during the investigation, you were aware that someone sent an anonymous letter that was found at the Green Bay Post Office that said body was burnt up in aluminum smelter, 3 a.m. Friday morning, right? Somebody sent them an anonymous letter saying that? Oh my. I'm aware of that letter. The exact verbiage, I'm not sure, but something to that effect, yes. All right, and it was contained in an envelope from the Green Bay Police Department that had a big sticker on it, fluorescent green, that said, check for latents, right? I believe so, yes. Now, that letter sat in the property department of Calumet Sheriff's Department until I discovered it, just this past November. Isn't that right? Until you discovered it? Until I pointed it out to you. That's where it was, yes. You and Mr. Investigator Wiegert were present when I found this particular letter in the property inventory, right? Yes. And was only then that it was sent to the crime lab to be analyzed for any sort of prints or anything, right? I believe so. It was because the body being burnt in the smelter didn't fit your theory that Mr. Avery was guilty of this crime. I felt it didn't fit the facts and the evidence. The smelter was examined by arson investigators and they determined that it didn't appear to have been used for a while. Did you suggest any DNA or the anthropologist examine it to see if there were any bone fragments? The particular arson investigator that examined that is the one that found most of the bone fragments in the burn area. And if that smelter had been used to burn the body, though, it would really tend to indicate that Mr. Avery wasn't guilty of the crime because it would not make sense to burn the body in the smelter, take the bones, and place them on their own backyard, would it? Objection, speculation. Judge, we're just getting into what makes sense about what Mr. Avery did, are we? The court says, I will sustain the objection. All right, I will move on. Let me just fast forward a little bit here to February and March of 2006. Okay? Are you with me? Yes. All right. By that time, through all of your investigation, you knew that as of that time, you had found no physical evidence linking Teresa Halbach to Mr. Avery's trailer or garage right up to February 28th. I don't believe that's accurate. What did you find? We found shell casings in the garage that did match to the rifle in the house. This is a junkyard. People shoot guns all over all the time, right? I mean, you found shells all over the place. 40 acres, right? Oh, certainly, yes. Junkyard, these people were sighting rifles. You knew that shooting rabbits, the mere existence of shells without a link to a particular body doesn't prove anything, does it? I don't know if at that time our anthropologist had indicated, indicated that there was possible bullet holes in the skull or not, but if there were, the shells didn't link to that anyway, did they? The shells linked to a rifle found in the trailer. That's all it was. Right, which could have had nothing to do with the offense as far as you knew at that time. It could have been, we didn't know. Okay, and you mentioned on direct something about bloodstains and the crime lab finding little extra areas. So the jury is not left speculating for the next week about whether those were ever found to be Teresa Halbach. They were not. Isn't that right? That's correct. Man, I mean, I gotta say, these lawyers are, Steven Avery's lawyers are pretty good, doing the best that they can with the information that they had at the time. They didn't know about Bobby Dassey's computer searching habits and all the little inconsistencies and lies that we're getting now, because we can look back and look at these interviews and things. They didn't have that hindsight. Now we do. All right, so that's correct. None of the bloodstains matched anyone except Mr. Avery. Yes, all right. And it was only on a subsequent search around March 1st and 2nd that any fragments of bullets or bullets themselves were found in Mr. Avery's garage, right? March 1st and 2nd. So this was well after. So they searched the whole property and didn't take any bullet casings, but they figured, oh, we need something to put Teresa's DNA on, so we need a bullet casing, since that's what the anthropologist said, that there were bullet holes. So they had to go back and find bullet casings, and they knew from searching that garage before that there were bullet casings all over the place. So, I mean, it's not that difficult to say, oh, hey, let's go get a bullet and rub some chapstick of Teresa's that we have on it, which I think that's what they did. Now, were you present for the execution of search warrants for Mr. Avery's trailer and garage, again, on March 1st and 2nd? Again, so this is the following year of it, when Teresa goes missing. She goes missing 2005, November, or October 31st, October 31st, 2005. We're now in March 2006. They're coming back to the house to get more bullet casings, because they probably knew they already were there, and they were like, hey, we got to go back and get it so we can put Teresa's DNA on it, because they didn't have anything. Okay, and are you aware that they were doing more of these logs, checking people in and out of the scene, as should be standard procedure? Yes. And you are probably on here somewhere. There you are. If you could identify Exhibit 147 for me, that looks like an entry log dated March 1st, 2006 at 15:30 hours, Avery Road, State Trunk, Highway 147. This would have been a login sheet out away from the two scenes of the residences, the garage, more of an entry type login sheet. All right, so for everyone coming back to the yard, or back to that road, so anybody who is coming back on the Avery salvage property, that 40-acre area, is that right? I believe so, yes. And Exhibit 146, I had those backwards, sorry. And this is March 2nd, appearing to be the same type of log sign-in sheet, probably in the same area. Okay, and for that area. All right, you arrived at 17:35, so 5:35 p.m., right? Yes. Can you tell me who arrived at 6:10? 1800 hours. Yes, Sergeant Lank from Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Lieutenant Lank. Did you ask him to come to the scene? I don't recall if I personally asked him to come to the scene or not. So this was now 5 months after the original searches for that week of November, approximately. 5 months later. Yes. About 4 months, he says, yes. Certainly wasn't necessary on that occasion for Mr. Lank to arrive to be somebody who would help search Mr. Avery's residence or garage. Again, was it? No, I don't believe he did search there. I think some of his personnel were there, and he, as their supervisor, I don't know if that's why he stopped out there. What a cop-out answer. Okay. Is that his name squeezed in there almost as an afterthought on the second to the last line? Kratz says, I'm going to object. It's argumentative. Buting says, I'm sorry, counsel is right. All right. I take it the question is being withdrawn. I will withdraw the question. And do you see Mr. Lank again at the scene the following morning? I'm going to object. Didn't Mr. Fassbender say he wasn't there the next day? The court says, Mr. Buting, you might want to rephrase the question. Did you see Mr. Lank's name on Exhibit 146 as having logged in and entered the scene again the morning of March 2nd? Yes. And at what time would that be? 8:49 a.m. All right. I will put it up quickly on the Elmo. Now, this search is the search that where a couple of bullet fragments were discovered, right? Yes. 5 months after the previous searches. 4 months. My math is bad, I guess. 4 months. Yes. Okay. And it's not like you were looking in the first search or having your officers look in that first search, was it? 5 entries to his garage the week of November 1st or 5th to the 12th. They were looking for small items such as this, right? Some of those searches were more specific for items, some were not. Some were overall searches. Okay, and in fact, in one of those searches, one of those 5 entries at least, police did recover, you said, a number of shells to a .22 caliber rifle. Shell casings laying on the floor. Okay, so not much bigger than a bullet. Fragments that were found on the first and the second, actually probably quite a bit bigger in comparison. If you have a bullet fragment like that, it's a shell casing like that. But this was your crack team of searchers, right? The best you had out there. This is the team I sent there, yes. Okay, and they did bring shells back, but no bullets, right? The shells were laying in the middle of the floor, basically. At that time, though, none of the investigators knew that there would be evidence from the anthropologist that suggested that perhaps Teresa Halbach had actually been shot in the head with cranial pieces, did they? That information came later. True, yes. Shortly before this March 1st and March 2nd search? I don't know. I'm not sure when that information came in. So, exactly. They found out she got shot in the head, and they had to go back and find a bullet casing. So, well, let me just see if I can refresh your recollection. Well, I don't want to waste time right here, but at any rate, I will move on. What's wrong, Ambers? My dog coming up to me. All right, so let's move along. Important dates of the investigation. Additional search warrants were issued, right? Yes. By this time, you knew that the mattresses, both bedroom mattresses, had been thoroughly examined by visually and otherwise for blood, and no blood was found, right? By March 1st and 2nd? Yeah, before that date. So you knew officers had gone into the bedding, right? Yes, I just don't recall if we took the mattresses. Okay. The court says, Mr. Buting, can you specify the mattresses we're talking about? Okay. I'm not sure that was done. Mr. Buting says, all right, let me put it this way. In the first, what did we have? 12 entries to Mr. Avery's residence. No blood was found or seen on the mattress in Mr. Avery's bedroom, right? I don't believe so. And no blood was seen on any of the sheets or bedding. I believe that's correct. And you have been to the unaliving. I don't know how many unaliving scenes you have been to, but you have been to bloody scenes before, right? Yes. Stabbings? Yes. And you are familiar with cast-off blood spatter? Yes. That is, if someone is stabbing a person who's laying on a mattress in the middle of Mr. Avery's bedroom repeatedly, there will be blood spatter on the ceiling, the walls, and wherever from the knife, drips from the knife. There may be. And there may be. There most definitely would be. All right. And there were none in this case, right? None that we found. And no clumps of a woman's hair that were found cut off anywhere in the bedroom. That's correct. So no trail of blood as one would expect if you carry a body that has been stabbed on the mattress off of Mr. Avery's bedroom or in Mr. Avery's bedroom through the house and out the back door. Unless it was cleaned up. No, we didn't see anything. But you guys luminoled. So how can you say that he cleaned it up? He cleans up so well from ending someone's life and having this big messy crime scene. He cleans up so well, but yet there's like 7 layers of dust on everything everywhere in his house, in the garage and whatever. Like, no, it didn't happen there. There's just no way. Unless it was cleaned up. No. You luminoled. It was not cleaned up. You would have found it with luminol. All right, and outside of the back porch or on the front porch, that wooden deck, no blood trail dripping, right? If they would have went that way, they could have went out the back door also. All right, which was a little stoop, concrete, steps. Yes, no blood in there, right? Not that I know of. No blood trail leading into the garage of Mr. Avery or into the garage or outside the garage. No, not that I know of. Okay, and inside the garage, a few blood stains, but not Teresa Halbach's blood, right? Correct. So, in short, then by March 1st and March 2nd, when those search warrants were issued, 4 months of investigation had found not one shred of Teresa Halbach's DNA anywhere in Mr. Avery's trailer or garage. Isn't that right, sir? Yes. Thank you. No further questions. I mean, bam. I mean, that says it all right there. I'm stopping here. This is the perfect place to stop. So we are stopping here, and we will continue on. I can't remember who's next. I think we have a little more law enforcement that we want to read through their testimonies. I think we're doing Remacher and Lank and Colburn. We're doing all 4 of them. So 3 of them. I can count. All right. So thank you so much for following along with me. This has been wild and crazy. And this was, I wanted to stop in certain places, but I'm like, no, it's really way too interesting. So, the answer is right there. They didn't have a single. Let's look at that. Look at that again. So in short, then by March 1st and March 2nd, when those search warrants were issued, 4 months of investigation had not found one shred of Teresa Halbach's DNA anywhere in Mr. Avery's trailer or garage. And he, co-lead investigator, agrees, yes, that is correct. Bam. I don't know what else. All right, so on that note, I am out of here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Thank you guys. If you've been impacted by a true crime and would like your story told in your own words, or if you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted or accused of a crime, please write to crimeincourtchannel@gmail.com and tell us your real true crime encounters. Thanks for watching.